Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you all for being here. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Sadaf Saeed. I am the Executive Director of the Muslim Women's Organization based here in Orlando. And I am really excited to welcome you to our very first Let's Talk About Marriage workshop. And this one is about pre-work. So we all understand how in marriage, a lot of times as the bride, I'm going to speak about from my own experience, you just show up to the wedding and you sign a piece of paper sometimes, and you don't understand the whole process. And we just want to make sure that anybody who is going into a marriage understands their rights, and parents understand their responsibilities and rights as well, and their daughters' rights, so that we can hopefully prevent some things from causing harm to women later on, because what we're finding is that women are getting into marriage without any of these protections that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given to us in our faith. And we want to make sure that everyone is educated about all of these things. And we could not think of anyone better to talk about this and educate you all about this than Aisha Rahman. So let me just tell you a little bit about Aisha before I hand it over to her. Aisha is joining us from Atlanta right now, and she is of counsel. Am I saying that right, Aisha? Of counsel for the big firm. And through this position, she actually helps a lot of women that are going through divorce, child custody matters, people that are interested in Islamic marriage contracts and child support issues. So this is her job. This is what she does all the time, right? And Aisha also trains judges and lawyers and advocates about Islamic family law. And that's why we are very honored to have you here, Aisha, because this is something that not a lot of people know about. And before Aisha went into the big firm and moved to Atlanta, she was actually the executive director of Karama. Karama is the Muslim Women Lawyers for Human Rights. And that's where I met Aisha in her role at Karama. We had gone for a summer leadership program. It's a LLSP, the
Law and Leadership.
That's what it's called, summer program. And so the president of the board and I went a few years back. I think it was 2018 or 2017. We went and we found out about this program, and when Sophie, our board president, saw the name, she's like, oh my God, I went to school with Aisha. So it was just a reconnection for Sophie. And then for me, an introduction to what Karama does, what Aisha does. And before being at Karama, Aisha was actually in Tennessee. She grew up in Tennessee, and she went to Emory University and for her undergrad, and then the University of Tennessee for law school. And Emory is where our board chair actually met Aisha Rahman. So Aisha has actually come and done some board retreat leadership trainings for us, our organization. And just recently, I've been part of this Bayan. Bayan is an Islamic graduate school in California. They had a 15-week program around ending gender-based violence in the Muslim community. And Aisha did a session in her role as an advisor and a trainer for Heart. She did a session about not domestic violence, but Islamic law as it pertains to domestic violence. And I thought this was a very important information that we needed to bring to our community. So that is why I am extremely happy that you're here, Aisha, because this is so important for everybody in our community to know, and our daughters to know, and moms to know. So I am going to hand it over to you to take over. And I'm sorry that was such a long introduction, but people need to know we have a big deal here.
Oh, you guys are so sweet. That is so not true. But alhamdulillah, I think that there's just been so many concentric kind of points of confluence between us and our work. I've been so blessed to be meeting with you all in different capacities and talking to you all. I wish I was there in person. I spent a couple of sessions with MWO and the board in person in Orlando, and it's so nice. And I actually really miss my trips. I think probably all of us miss traveling in the same way that we were doing it before. But alhamdulillah, we're here, and this is going to be great. We're here with each other for a long time this afternoon. So bear with me. I actually had a really fun time preparing for today because, it's so interesting to me how I spend a lot of my time on the back end. So Sadaf and I talked a lot about this before we had this session, which is that, when you're on the back end, meaning as an attorney, as a family law attorney, I'm often on the back end of what happens when things go wrong. So, I'm dealing with folks that are going through a divorce. I'm dealing with folks that are at the worst time in their lives. Divorce is not easy, even for people who are stable, who are well adjusted, who are positive about what they're doing. They're positive in their decision that this is what they want. It's still just an incredibly hard time for them to be dealing with all of these complicated issues. And often I feel like I wish I had some time on the front end with these people, because maybe, I'm not saying that, we could have prevented the divorce, but some of these questions that come up at the time of the divorce could have potentially been addressed before, in my opinion. The only kind of, in my legal capacity, the only time I get to really explore that with folks is when I work with prenuptial agreements. So I have had in the last year, I've probably had 2 or 3 people come to me before they get married for a prenuptial agreement. And we can talk a lot more about that later on in the afternoon. But that's the only, in my private work or my law firm work, that's the only time I get to talk really about premarital issues. And I really enjoy talking about what I have learned on the front end so that we can hopefully prevent some of these issues on the back end. And then the other thing I will share with you all is that even though this is what I've done, I've been practicing family law for over 10 years, and I had been even when I got married. It's different going through it yourself. It's different going through it yourself. It's different exploring these issues in your own life, as opposed to just giving advice or talking to other people about their experiences. And so I'll share more anecdotes about my own personal story with you all once we get started. So I'm going to just share my screen. Just give me a second while we get started here. I see that many of you are on mute, which is totally fine. But I will ask you to unmute as we get later on in the session, because I definitely want you all to, oh, wait, this is not the view that I want. Give me just one second. And you guys will see all my notes. How do I get to, give me one second. Okay. All right. Yeah, so I definitely want you guys to unmute so that you can participate, because today is going to be a very participatory program. Okay, so this is me. As Sadaf mentioned, I do have my own private practice. I also, because of my role at Karama when I was the ED and just doing a lot of gender justice work, I really enjoy, frankly, I think it keeps me sane, because a lot of the divorce stories and the family law stories are so hard for me to deal with, that I also have this second aspect of the work that I do, which is all about training and consulting and talking with women around the country, around the world, really about gender issues. And so, in addition to my firm, I started this consulting company called Sugarlim, and this is my information for Sugarlim. If you guys ever want to reach out to me on these issues, happy to talk more. So I'm doing this presentation in that capacity. Okay, so before we get into the meat of the session, I want to talk a little bit about community agreements or group norms. I've added a few here for myself, but this is one of the times that I want you guys to unmute and tell me some of your own. And while you do that, I'll tell you some of my community agreements that I believe in. So first of all, no question is a bad question. I think I always start with that for me. So no question is a bad question for me. I should edit that to say, because maybe other people don't want certain questions asked to them, and that's totally fine. I have done so many of these presentations. I'm very comfortable drawing boundaries, and I'm also very comfortable sharing things that I'm willing to share. And so if you all have a question and you're worried about being offensive or being too intrusive, don't. When it comes to me, you can feel comfortable asking me whatever you'd like. And that leads to my second community agreement, which is that I think that we're here to learn from one another. I really want you all to participate. And then I added this for myself, which is that everyone has a different path to marriage and relationships. And I'm hoping that we have all come today with an open mind and without judgment. And I think that that is really important when we're talking about very intimate and serious issues like marriage and relationships and intimacy and that kind of a thing. And I'm hoping that we can just keep judgment out and keep an open mind in. So I want you to give you all the floor to tell me if you have any community agreements or group norms. And basically what that means for those of you who may not be familiar with what a community agreement is or a group norm, this is a space, it's a virtual space that we're creating for ourselves for the next couple of hours. And whether we're together virtually or we're together in person, I firmly believe that you can't just say that this is a safe space. You actually have to do things actively to create a safe space. And so, is there anything that you all want to add to these community agreements to ensure that this is in fact a safe space for all of you to talk about these issues that we're going to talk about, marriage, frankly? I heard someone unmute, but I'm not hearing the talking.
I have one. I really like the step up and step back one. I have a tendency to talk a lot. So if sometimes I need to realize that, okay, my voice needs to not be the only one being heard. So I think it's important to be mindful if I'm talking a lot, just to step back and encourage others who may not have shared their voice to step up.
Thank you. That's great. Anybody else? Okay. Well, if you all think of any as we go on, we don't need to, I'm not going to force you all to give me some group norms, but hopefully if we ever need to, if you ever feel that the space is compromised or you're not feeling comfortable, We can receive chats. You guys can chat to us. We can definitely reinforce these community agreements throughout the session. And so just kind of keep it in the back of your mind that we're mindful of making this a very productive and open environment for all of you. And if we can do better while we're here, we would be happy to do that. Okay. Opening exercise. I want you all to just take 2 minutes. You don't have to write it down. I see many of you are on your phones. I'm hoping you're not driving. You may be. So you don't necessarily need to write it down. But just write down the top 3 things that you want to get out of today's session. And I want you to just, why, the question is, why did you come today? You have a lot of things that you could be doing on your Sunday. I know that it's spring break for a lot of you. Why are you here? What do you want to learn? I'm going to give you 2 minutes, and then I want you guys to share. And what we'll do is we'll put it in a parking lot for us to make sure we get to at some point this afternoon.
Assalamualaikum.
Welcome, Salam. Okay, I'm going to give you guys just another minute, and then we're going to open it up. Okay, why don't you all, I'm going to take notes. So please unmute yourselves. There's not so many people on the phone that I think it's going to get to be problematic. So tell me a little bit about why you guys are here. Why did you choose to come today?
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Maimuna.
Welcome, Salam Maimuna. How are you?
Alhamdulillah. I wanted to learn from the mistakes I made in my previous marriage, understand the concepts of marriage as a whole, and what to do before my next marriage. Things to look for, things to take care of before that.
Great. Thank you. Great. Anybody else?
Assalamualaikum.
Welcome, Assalam.
My name is Haley, and I'm a new Muslim revert. So for me, the reason that I attended today's meeting is because I really want to understand the Islamic marriage process, and then learn about the rights of a wife and a husband during engagement and then upon marriage, and finally, what kinds of questions and things to consider when you're choosing a spouse.
Great. Glad to have you, Haley.
Thank
Okay, what else do we have?
Assalamualaikum. Oh,
We
go
have
ahead.
2 people.
Go ahead, sister. Go ahead.
Mine's is pretty quick. Assalamualaikum. My name is Sada. I was just more curious about Mahed. I'm recently engaged, and I've been hearing multiple different opinions that are all also apparently facts. So I just kind of want to get a better understanding of like, what are my rights with Mahed? What does Mahed actually mean for my future husband? And then how to come to like an agreement on what that amount or what that Mahed should be.
Congratulations on your engagement. I would love to talk to you about the Mahed. That's like my bread and butter. So we're definitely going to talk about that. That sounds great. And there was somebody else who unmuted while you were talking. Sorry.
Yes, that's me. Assalamualaikum.
Welcome.
Thank you so much for doing this. I'm sure a lot of us will benefit from it. May Allah reward you. So my name is Hassanatu, and I've actually been divorced for about a year. Well, the edda, but we still haven't done the legal aspect of it yet. So, and we have 3 kids. So I'm hoping to get some more information about the process, the risks or the disadvantages of delaying going to court. You know, obviously, you know, we're still legally married,
Okay.
haven't lived together in a year, and the edda has been over since then. So just would like to learn more about, you know, like the timelines, and especially with kids being involved, and what advice you would give, and also to prepare for the next. So I'm not at the next stage yet because I still haven't concluded this one, but inshallah, I
Sure.
hope to learn more
Inshallah.
about,
Okay.
you know.
That
Thank
sounds
you.
great. Happy to help with that, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Salam alaikum. My name's Michelle. I am the DV advocate for MWO. So I'm here I'm curious about what your red flags are, because I'm certainly familiar with, you know, red flags for DV and stuff. So
Yeah.
and so I'm curious about that, but I'm also curious about the process of Islamic marriage, because I'm a revert. I got married in Morocco, so I know what my process looked like, but it was very paperwork heavy for mixed nationality marriage and such. But I understand that how my husband and I did things was not traditional in that sense. So I'm curious to learn more about how that process works.
Great. Thanks, Michelle. These are all great. I'm so excited. It's going to be a great day. Does anybody else have anything else they want to share?
Yes, Assalamu alaikum everyone. My name is Fatima and I work with the Islamic Center of Orlando. And part of my job is take appointments for people that would like to get a marriage done at the masjid or get a divorce. So prior to that, I get lots of questions from the community about these 2 things. And I'm here just to learn, to be able to help other people understand their rights and their dues, especially when it comes to getting married or getting divorced, inshallah.
Great.
So I really appreciate this workshop and you taking time doing this for the community. Jazakum Allah khair.
Thank you. Thank you for your service at the masjid. I know that you probably have a lot of stories that you can share with us. Okay. Well, if anybody else has anything, just unmute. We'll move on. And if you have anything to just chime in, like I said. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about marriage readiness. So as I mentioned before, the thing that it's really interesting to me when you talk about marriage and when you talk about being ready for marriage. So I will talk a little bit about my own experience in talking about being ready for marriage. And I understand that my experience was not very unique. It sounds like it's very similar to what a lot of you all are going through, but my marriage was unique in the sense that I am a divorce attorney. And so I have all this information about red flags, certainly, or problems that have come up in folks' marriage that has led to a divorce. But I also grew up in this very traditional, Desi Muslim household that had a whole other kind of socialization with respect to marriage. And we'll definitely explore a lot of that as we talk today. So this is just coming from me. In my opinion, in the Muslim community, we talk a great deal about getting married and the importance of marriage in Islam, the importance of partnership, how it represents half of your iman to get married. We encourage early marriage, get married younger, not necessarily, child marriage. I'm not talking about that. That's a whole other issue, but just getting married quickly. And I don't know that we spend a great deal of time talking about how do you get ready for marriage? What do you need to think about? How do you need to prepare for marriage? We're not going to break into rooms. We're just going to stay in the one room together, but I want to open up with you all with a few questions. And that is, well, first I want to explore, what does marriage even mean to you? And I'm not necessarily talking about the Islamic perspective. Certainly, we're going to talk a little bit about that. But if you all would be willing to share how you were socialized to think about marriage, either in your childhood or now as an adult, I want to explore that with you. What do you guys think? What does marriage mean? So why don't you start, since
I'll go.
you can talk while everyone else is figuring
Yeah. So I got married very young. And for me, marriage was what it meant to me. I think for me, I always wanted to be a mom. And in order to be a mom, I needed to be married, right? So I think for me, that family was my goal, to be a mom. And that's the way that I looked at it. I wasn't necessarily growing up very much oh, I want to fall in love and I need a guy or anything. Like those thoughts didn't occur to me. For me, it was all like, I want to be a mom really bad.
Mm-hmm.
I want to get married because I want to be a mom. So I think that's what it meant to me from the beginning.
So let me
what
ask
it
you
means.
a follow-up question to that. I
Go
want to ask you
ahead.
a follow-up question. Do you feel that ever caused an issue in your marriage, that you were focusing more on children and the family as opposed to the partnership between you and your spouse?
Well, I think once I found my husband, he found me, right? Like we met at a conference, right? Once I met him, that was different. I'm talking about before I met him, it was all about just being a mom. But once I met him, it was definitely about us. And we talked about that. Like we talked about um, that I wanted kids and all of it. I wanted kids early, and those were the conversations that we always had in the beginning. So it was very much in agreement. But then once I did meet him, it was all about that relationship, and it was a quote unquote love marriage, right? So it was definitely a deeper thing than just having kids. But the initial in my head, when I thought of marriage, it was more about being a mom.
Got it. Thank you for sharing. What about the rest of you? What does marriage mean? What do you guys think about when you think about getting married, or that you thought about when you got married before you're married now?
Assalamu alaikum. This is Maimuna. I think for me, I didn't even, because I like the other sister that just spoke, I got married young, and from the culture that I came from, I think I was just thinking that even though from a Western world that wasn't young, but culturally, from a Western world that was young, but culturally I thought like I was, getting late to get married. So I think I didn't really pay attention to it. But now for me, now understanding, and then after all the process, I see marriage as like friendship, love, partnership, respect for each other, trust in each other. And I thought like, even though I went in immature and young, but I thought like that came during the 20 plus years. Mm-hmm. But then now I'm understanding that some of it was not there. And also it could be too, because he was young too,
Sure.
So, yeah. So I think it was basically, I didn't have I think, I guess I can say I saw it cute and thought that I'm going to be late to get married, so I didn't really put a lot of thoughts into it.
Sure.
But now I see it differently now. Now I see what I want, and I, hoping to do better in the next.
Maimouna, I'm going to ask you a follow-up question. So this is related to what I have on the slide here. You talked a little bit about how what you've come to know now is something different than what you knew then. How, what do you wish you had thought? Do you wish you had thought about these things before you got married? And how did you
yes.
come to this conclusion, if you don't mind sharing?
Well, how the divorce ended up, and before the divorce, like the issues we started having made me realize that honestly, the key thing was we were both young. We were both young. I was afraid of, saying like I'm getting older or not to go astray. And then I think on his hand, he was afraid to lose me, and he knew I wasn't going to like encourage him as a boyfriend, and then now I feel like and even while in the marriage, when I got started thinking about it, that it wasn't a good thing, but I settled because by then the kids had come, and then I also looked at it saying that I can suck it up, and I guess that would be the only word I can use. It's like I can handle it, I can deal with it. But then when he started feeling it, then I really realized that it wasn't just me, it was both of us, that we were both young and not ready for it. And then, we got married.
Great. Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome.
Does anybody else have any insight into what marriage means to you, maybe now versus then? Or the folks who aren't married in the room, when you think about getting married, what does it mean? What do you feel that marriage means to you? And is it important to you, or is it not important? Are you cool with just not being married and hanging out?
So for me, I did not take Shahada until a few years after I was married. And before I got married, I was very independent. I lived alone for 17 years. I had my own house, I had my career, I had my dog, I had a full life. I traveled a lot. And so to me, it was about, can you add something to my life? Can you provide me with partnership? Can you provide me with joy and friendship? Because I don't need you financially. I am kind of ambivalent about children. So like
keeping it real.
Right. So I don't, I'm not feeling the need to get married, to have a partner, to have children. So like you need to, bring something to the table, partner wise, friendship wise, and of course, romantically, because I wanted a love marriage. I didn't have this, I wasn't Muslim at that time. So, not having a love marriage was a concept that that I didn't even know about at that point. You gotta bring something really spectacular to me for me to consider it, because, I've got things handled.
Great. Thank you. That's definitely a good perspective. Anybody else? Okay, we're going to have some more discussion about this, but yeah, so all of you have really highlighted some interesting, I want your minds kind of churning and thinking a little bit about, as we're thinking about getting ready for marriage, what does marriage mean to you? Again, this is something that, if I'm being critical of the Muslim community, when I think about my youth, there was a lot of I got mixed, I'll be honest, I feel like I got mixed messages. So from my mom is a huge believer in marriage. She thinks it's very important. However, my mom had, in amongst the various aunties who are marriage crazy, she was different because my grandfather, her father, passed away when she was 16, and she was the eldest child of 7 siblings. And my grandmother did not work outside the home. She didn't really have a training or education that would facilitate her to work outside the home. And so my mom, when she was very young, had the reality of dropping out of school or not matriculating to college and going to work so that she could support her family. And so to her, growing up in this culture, I'm Pakistani, growing up in this Pakistani culture, which is very emphatic about marriage and the importance of marriage, and frankly, women oftentimes compromising for marriage for the man, she had very real concerns about what would happen to her family when she got married. How would they survive? How would they make money? How would they make ends meet? She also had a lot of trust issues because she lost her father and frankly did not have the luxury of therapy or counseling at that time to process what that loss really meant, and how various other people in their family, especially the male family members, dealt with her and her mom in the aftermath of my grandfather's divorce. And so there were a lot of issues there that I think, she was grappling with when thinking about getting married. And she was struggling because she came from this culture of get married, get married, get married, marry a good man, marry a man who can support you financially. And that's really the focus of what you need to do in your life. And so when I was coming up, I got this marriage is very important lesson, but I also got this, well, not until you are self-sufficient and not until you are educated yourself and you have a job. And so there was just this I felt like this mixed message thing. And I was focused a lot on financial issues and education and really not thinking about what marriage meant other than it's important from an Islamic perspective. It's important from a cultural perspective, but did I really think about if I was ready to be married in the terms of have I dealt with my issues? Have I dealt with my triggers? None of that was anything I was thinking about. So we're going to get to that in a second. Really quickly, I want to give you all a reference tool. So many of you have probably heard of the Gottman Institute. John Gottman has made his living on talking about marriage and relationships and intimate partnerships and all things related to that world. And I'll be honest, I know a lot of friends who swear by his courses, swear by his seminars. I haven't spent a great deal exploring the Gottman Institute's various resources, but there's a ton of free resources on their website. And so I included a link here for you all to explore. There was a really interesting article about how do you know that you're ready for marriage? And then some signs of when your partner is not ready for marriage and how do you deal with that? Or how do you identify whether the person that you're with is ready for marriage? So that link is here, and I'm happy to share these slides with you all after so you know how to get to these links. Okay. Oh, thank you. Sadaf is sharing that in the chat. Okay, so like I said, we're not going to do a breakout room. I want to continue the conversation that have been having. on before we even talk about the importance of marriage and what it really means to us as Muslim women. What do you feel like you need to do? Forget the other person for a second. So forget your partner. What do you as a woman need to do, work on, etc., before you get married? I'm going to give you guys a minute or two to kind of think to yourselves, and then we'll come back together and talk about this together. Stop sharing for a second while we do that. Okay, let's come back together. Tell me, what does a person need to do to work on themselves before they get married, in your opinion?
Hi, Assalamualaikum. Again. So something that I've been thinking about a lot is mental health. And I think it's something that the Muslim community that I've grown up around, we just don't talk about enough and understand it enough. So something for me is just working on my mental health and making sure that like I'm in a good place where I can go into this relationship and this partnership and allow it to grow and continue to be healthy, and not letting maybe my triggers or my past experiences not get in the way, because I don't like the way that sounds, but just kind of become a hiccup in the relationship.
Okay. How do you get to that self-awareness about your mental health? How does that happen?
Well, myself personally, I've worked with therapists pretty often throughout college and a little bit after college as well. My like I like to think that I'm fairly lucky. My parents were pretty understanding about that growing up. So I was given that option and I was given that opportunity to go see therapists and talk about it. Given I haven't been consistent with it, but it is something that helped me become self-aware of like, hey, this is something you still need to work on, or hey, you did a good job working on XYZ, continue working on that, or maybe try a different way for this. So that's where I got that self-awareness from.
Great. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else? What do you think that we need to work on with ourselves before getting married?
Assalamu alaikum again. For me, most of what she said, and then another thing that I'm learning recently is also my relationship with other people, because I feel like they did go together. After I realized it, then I realized that my relationship, especially with close family members, did indirectly interfere with my relationship in my marriage, because like how I allowed them to treat me was how he or other people treated me. So now I'm paying attention and I'm setting boundaries regardless of who the person is. So that would help, because I realized that like the situations that I had with him wasn't just him. I had that with a lot of other people, other relationships that I had, even those, yeah. So
Great, thank you. Anybody else have any thoughts?
I think I have one along those lines that I wish I am divorced, but I wish like before marriage, I worked on understanding how my environment affected me. So
Hmm.
if, for example, if it hindered my self-expression, freedom of self-expression, then I will continue to follow that pattern in the marriage, which may not be healthy. So our environment affects us in a way that makes us form a pattern of behavior that may not be healthy. And we carry that into the marriage if we don't have the self-awareness that others talking about.
Sure. Great, thank you.
I would like
I
to add.
wanted,
Sorry.
go ahead, Fatima.
Okay, Assalamu alaikum. Yeah, I would like to add another thing that a person should really pay attention to his or her physical and emotional state to make sure that they are ready for a marriage. Physical meaning that there is no physical issues that will be a problem when it comes to intimacy and being close to another person. Emotional, and I've seen that issue coming. Some people, they get divorced and they're still dealing with the separation and the divorce, and they go and throw themselves in a new marriage. So we just have to make sure that we are really ready to go into a relationship 100%, not 50%, and to just be honest and open whenever there is an emotional issue or a physical issue, or that we need to disclose that prior to the marriage and see if the partner is willing to be patient and work those issues up front, or just we need some time to work on the issues ourselves before we throw ourselves in a relationship, in a new relationship.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Sadaf, did you have a thought?
Yeah, so the thing that comes to my mind is just identity, your own, who am I? I got married so young that I didn't really have that develop. Like, who am I? Not in relation to anyone else. And what do I want with my life? What are my goals in life? Like all of these things as far as myself. I was so young, I never had that thought through or established within me. I was always somebody else's something else, right? Like I was a daughter or this or that, but I was never my own person at that age. So if I could go back, I think I would take some time to really figure out who I am.
And how would you deal if you took, from adulthood at 18 to, not to put a time frame on it, we're going to talk about time frame, but what if it takes you 20 years to figure out who you are? And do you feel that our communities, plural, are open to women figuring out who they are and getting married in their late 30s, 40s, 50s?
I don't know. They're not, of course. They're definitely not. And I think you're always evolving. Like there's no end state of that, right? But there just has to be a thought to self. And I think it doesn't have to be this evolved human being, but just some kind of awareness of like you said, like your goals in marriage even, right? Like what do I want? Who am I? What do I want to be? I think just even a basic understanding of that is important. It doesn't have to be I'm there,
Absolutely. So you've picked on something that I think that a lot of you all are talking about, which is self-awareness. And I think that is something that so another personal anecdote, I'm pregnant right now and giving birth probably pretty soon. And I'm pregnant with a girl, alhamdulillah. And one of the things that I've been thinking so much about in preparing for being a mom to a little girl is how are we socializing little girls? And of course, this is just a, you know, hazard of my work also. But I think about, you know, what am I going to be teaching her? How am I going to be talking to her about certain things, particularly about relationships, and not just relationships in an intimate way, but also just relationships with family and friends and uncles and aunts and all these amazing cousins and all these amazing people that are in their life, in her life. And how do we as people in these communities not only debunk or dismantle some of the problematic narratives that have been happening around marriage, but also how do we advocate for the kinds of stories and work that we want to see happen? Because oftentimes the socializing, particularly around patriarchy, gender roles, that kind of thing, it starts very early. You're not even talking about marriage necessarily when you're starting to socialize children and young women at a young age to think in certain ways. And so by the time you get to quote unquote marriage age, whatever that is in your various communities, and not a lot of time has been spent on self-development, self-image, self-worth, mental health issues. Do you have triggers because of various issues that you have dealt with in your life? You know, when I was thinking about what a person would need to think about, I thought this was my list. You know, so personal maturity, perspectives around gender, my personal relationship with God. This was really big for me. You know, I thought, you know, so much of me being aware of who I was and who I am has nothing, especially spiritually, has nothing to do with another person. And I realized that I did have notions of this kind of romanticized notion of me and my husband are going to like pray together and it's going to be beautiful, and we're going to fast together and it's going to be beautiful, and we're going to do all of these things together. And I was centering the relationship and him kind of in that, as opposed to centering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and my personal accountability to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I'm not saying that there isn't a spiritual component to marriage. There certainly is, but I needed to check myself a little bit before thinking about what that looked like in a relationship with another person. Other things that I thought about are, what are my deal breakers and why? You know, we talk about deal breakers. What are the things that matter to you? So your goals are important, but why, you know, does it matter to you? From something small, which is not small for some people, but something small like, I don't want a smoker. Okay. Is that something that really matters to you? And why does it matter to you? And just thinking about little things to something much bigger, you know, bigger things like, what are my financial goals, or what are my, you know, spiritual goals, or whatever they are. So things to kind of think about. Your most important relationship in this world, I believe, is with yourself, and then and your relationship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then comes everything else. And I think that emphasis is, unfortunately, in my opinion, not placed in our communities as much as it should. It's always this relational piece of, what are your obligations as a daughter? What are your obligations as a mother? What are your obligations as a sister? What are your obligations as a wife? As opposed to, what are your obligations to yourself? And so just kind of something to think about. So what does Islam say about marriage? Again, we're going to get into the legal aspects kind of in the second half of the day, but marriage, and I put marriage contract here, is the most solemn covenant that a human enters into during their life. What is a covenant? A covenant is a promise that you're not only making to another person, but a covenant is a promise that you're making with the divine as well. And so to me, when two Muslims or two believers come into a covenant with one another, they have to always remember that there is a higher being that you are accountable to. And that higher being, of course, is God. And it is not just when you break a solemn covenant or break a vow, such as adultery, for example, you're not just hurting another person, you're hurting yourself, and you've also violated a covenant with God. And that is for Muslims. I mean, I don't necessarily I wouldn't emphasize this necessarily in a larger setting, or perhaps a more secular setting, but in the context of faith, I think it's really important to recognize that this is not just, a promise that you're making to another person, but you're making promises in front of God as well. And just for you all, I've included some verses in the Quran that talk about marriage. And one of you all, Michelle, I believe, was talking about domestic violence, and I often use these verses when I talk about domestic violence because it's so interesting how people forget, especially when talking about abusive relationships, what the Quran actually says about marriage. And these are the words. So the words that are popping out to me are comfort, tranquility, mercy, affection, security. These are the words when I'm looking at these verses just at baseline that are popping out to me. And how often are we as community members and Muslims really talking about those things, about comfort and tranquility and affection? A lot of you all are talking about love marriages versus being, introduced to someone, or kind of being not pushed, but introduced to marriage before you even know about love or loving someone, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself tells us that marriage is about affection. There is a concept of affection. We'll definitely talk about the sexual intimacy piece as well, but there's a lot of beautiful hadith about the beauty of physical love between partners that we don't spend a lot of time on. So just kind of something to think about when Islam talks about marriage. It's not talking in any of these verses about age. It's not talking about finances and making sure someone is that there are some verses about finances. We could talk about that too, but these are the kind of the nature of marriage from an Islamic perspective. And the root of the law, in my opinion, is about these kinds of things: comfort and tranquility and mercy and affection and protection. And yeah, that's why I wanted to share that with you all. Okay, I want to be mindful of, it's 4:05. We've been together for about an hour. I'm going to give you all a quick 5-minute break, if that's okay, just to use the restroom or whatnot, and then we'll come back to the session, if that's okay. Is that okay with everyone? A lot of you don't have your video on, so I don't know, but I feel like I'm getting a nod.
Yes.
That's okay. All right, we'll be back at 4:10.
That's good.
Okay, I'm back. Right. Let's talk about dating. I feel like this is a potentially taboo topic, but I'm not. The reason I'm bringing it up is because I feel that, and this is me sharing from my personal experience. There's a multitude of experience on this call, and all of you have been raised in different kinds of communities. And I'm certainly not trying to generalize that all Muslim communities are the same, because they certainly are not. But I think that I will just kind of give some person from my personal perspective. Dating was not a concept when I was growing up. There was not a encouraging of dating. There wasn't exploring of what dating actually means or what it meant. And frankly, dating was associated with a physical relationship, whatever that physical relationship meant. So holding hands, kissing, having sex, whatever it was always talked about as something that dating was always talked about something that was inappropriate because of a physical, there was always associated with something physical happening. And unfortunately, it was never talked about from the context of courtship or exploration of what conversations need to happen to lead to a fruitful and healthy marriage. And so I want to talk to you all a little bit about that. And this topic has already come up with you all. So beyond looking at yourself, now I want to talk about looking at your partnership, and you found someone that you potentially could be with. What do you think you need to ask your partner about before getting married? And before I have you all to unmute and talk about it, I want to give you all some two references that I think are great. I do a lot of trainings with Salma Abu Jadiri and Imam Majid up in DC. I don't know if you all know them, but they wrote a book together called Before Tying the Knot. It's quite good. And they actually have on the Adam Center, so Imam Majid is the Imam of the Adam Center, on his website. So this is the link, the adamcenter.org/marriage-services. There's a questionnaire that he has developed with Selma, with me, with several other people, which is very comprehensive. I mean, it's over 100 questions. It's a little intense. So for those of you who may not have bought into premarital counseling, which we're going to talk about a bit, this questionnaire is something that you can do yourself. You don't have to necessarily have a therapist or a counselor with you. You can explore these questions, and they've kind of talked about all of the many things that in their experience that have come up in marriage. So definitely check that out. But I want you all to now, and many of you have your cameras off. If you are not driving, I would love to see your beautiful faces. If you want to turn your cameras on and unmute so that I can actually see you and talk to you. Tell me about what you think you need to ask your partner about before you get married. What do you think?
I can go. I
Like,
think.
oh,
Sorry.
go ahead. Go ahead.
One of the things that I did talk to him about is like religious understanding, because he may be Muslim, but like what kind of understanding does he have of Islam? It could be school of thought, or it could be just that whole Islamic worldview. Just what perspective does he have? Because that makes it really hard when you are coming at the faith from different perspectives.
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to share my own experience with that. That was a doozy. What does everybody else think?
Assalamu alaikum. I have been thinking about what does he want in a marriage, or what kind of woman is he looking for? And I'm looking at it from an angle saying, from what he says, then I'll know if I want to continue talking to that person. Because when we were having issues and we went for counseling, and then when I was almost going to reconcile with my ex, I asked, what can he do to make the marriage work? And he didn't have anything to say. So that has like really been like a big red flag in my head, as in like, either you don't want to be held accountable for it after you say, or you just, don't want to put any thoughts in it. So for me now, I'm like, before we even get anywhere, I want to know what you are looking for and what do you want in a wife and stuff like that. Then I can know if I would tell you what I'm looking for.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Okay, what does everybody else think?
Assalamu
Alaikum.
So mine was, tell me about your family, and let him explain, how many family members do they have. And then after he explains, he tells me like what their names are. What do you guys do together? How, is there any activity that you guys do as a family? It's just, I like to ask these questions because I think that if he's really serious about marriage and starting a family, then he should at least, if he's not doing this with his own family, then most likely he's not even ready to get married. So I feel like this is a very important question. Of course, that's after, do you pray or not? Do you go? And then you would know if you can even ask him like what masjid does he go to? What are the activity that he does at the masjid and all of that.
Okay.
And excuse the noise that's around me.
No, that's great. You're totally fine. I feel like there was somebody else who wanted to chime in.
Assalamualaikum. I don't know if anyone else did, but I just had a quick thing.
Yeah.
So I've had like a couple non-negotiables whenever I talk to someone, and like when we're, kind of courting and, getting to know each other. And of course, like, the religiousness of, them and how they are is something that is important. But I think the biggest thing for me is like, how do you see children in your future? Like, where do children stand in your future with your wife? And if it's like an immediate, like, oh, I need to have like 6 kids, it's kind of a big red flag for me, because that's it. There's no consideration for your wife and what she
Why do you
wants.
think there's no consideration for your wife if you want 6 kids?
The immediateness of how they answer is kind of like what I base the answer, or what I base it off of. So if it's, like they just don't want to have a conversation about, oh, I need to have X amount of children. It's like, so what would you do in that scenario if you can't have kids? Right. Oh, well, that's, that wouldn't happen. So when they answer like that, that's kind of like a big red flag for me, especially as someone who has never really wanted children myself. So it's kind of like, is there that conversation we can have? Is there that communication? Do you give me the like feeling that like you won't have that conversation? You won't listen if what I have to say is not what you want to hear. So that's kind of something that I have to have that conversation before going forward.
Great. Your deal breaker. One of your deal breakers.
Yes.
Got it. Great. Any other thoughts?
If I may say something, I think our understanding of religion, which I think Sadaf pointed to a little bit, differ and is diverse. Like some people, for them, religion means someone who will pray with me and do some of the things. And while others, religion for them is, I'll be a good person, I treat people right, or so the level of spirituality. And for me, I developed this idea from the Prophet ﷺ, who said that we're mirror to one another. So the spirituality is not only in the rituals that we perform, but in the way we will learn from one another. So I would encourage any couple who is like considering marriage is to ask, what is really I admire about that person, their character, their virtues, and what can I learn from them in that way, so we can bring the best in each other rather than, trying to change each other.
Right. I was
think-
reading. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think at some point my husband might have used the word interrogation, because I met him while I was traveling, right? And so although I knew about Moroccan culture, I still had so much to learn, not only about him, but about his culture. And I wanted to learn about his family. And so I was asking all kinds of questions, not just as a potential partner, but as a person and, culturally. So, and I mean, even my best friends were like, you talk about everything with him. And I was like, well, isn't that the way it's supposed to be? So, and I laid everything on the table. I was like, I've been told I may have fertility issues. What do you think about adoption? Things like that. And he was like, I'm okay with adoption. And I observed how he was with his mother. And, I was like, I said, if you're going to come to the United States, your earning potential as an immigrant might not be as much as mine. How do you feel about staying home if we have kids and me being the breadwinner? And he was like, I'm okay with that. And, we had some of those really tough discussions from the beginning. So.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. So I want to segue the conversation into premarital counseling, and I'll share a little bit about my own experience. So, something that a lot of you are bringing up is spiritual readiness. There are so many other things. So my husband and I grew up in very different ways. My husband is Black. He's 10 years older than me. He was not raised Muslim. He was raised by a single mom. Father was not a part of his life. So in addition to cultural differences, we are not the same about anything. We're both strong believers in God, and that's about it. So financially, we were on polar opposite levels. Spirituality was different also. We'll talk about that in a minute. Culturally, completely different. Family dynamics, completely different. I grew up in a 2-parent household. Socioeconomic class was different. He has no siblings. I have 2 siblings. I'm an only girl. He's an only child, but has all these cousins that are siblings to him. It was very different. I mean, there were so many things that were going on. But we wanted to make it work. And so we explored premarital counseling. It was very important to him, frankly. So it's interesting. So the story goes that my husband had not converted when we met. And so I was younger than him, obviously younger than him. I was young in the relationship. I was very particular about talking about religion. That was all I wanted to talk about. So I wanted to talk about religion. I wanted to talk about whether he would consider conversion. I wanted to talk about what that looked like to him. I wanted to talk about all of my expectations in religion. And frankly, I was so focused on that for so long that I didn't even want to engage in the conversation about money or culture or kids or any of the other things, because to me, nothing else really mattered as much as religion. And he, being a little bit more mature in relationships than me, I will admit, was very realistic about the fact that, okay, we will talk about religion and we'll definitely raise that issue. But there's some other stuff that goes into marriage besides religion, and we kind of need to cover those things as well. And so he was a big believer in premarital counseling. And again, I was kind of warring these two sides of my brain. On the one hand, I had this very cultural view, Pakistani view of marriage, and on the other, I was like this litigator who was dealing with people who were going through a divorce, and there was just a clash that was happening. So I might encourage other people to go to premarital counseling, but frankly, when we finally decided to be married, after I had my questions answered and he had his questions answered, there was a very short window. It was like, we're engaged. Now, my mom and dad were not willing to let us be engaged for very long without being married. And so there was like 6 months where we had to get it all done, like get all the wedding prep done and premarital counseling done, because that was very important to both of us, but I would say more to my husband than me. And so I would encourage you all, and I know that this is from a position of privilege. This is coming from a position of privilege, but we often, a lot of, again, the way that we've been socialized, weddings are amazing. They're so fun. There's so much happening around weddings. This is not a Muslim thing. It's not an American thing. This is like a huge industry in like every community and culture around the world. Weddings are a big deal, very commercial. And so if you have the privilege and time and resources to delegate some of that planning to somebody else, family members or friends or whomever, I think that part of that excitement of being engaged or leading up to an engagement and eventual marriage, being spent on premarital counseling is hugely important. I am not a counselor or therapist by trade, and so I don't want to bring you this kind of expert opinion on this. It's more just my personal observations of going through it myself, and I just think it's really important because, again, there's several things at play. First of all, in premarital counseling, you may explore topics that you never even really thought to cover when you are in a courtship or dating relationship with your partner. And again, professionals are coming at it from the perspective of what they have observed are issues that come up. What are the most common issues that come up in marriage that also could lead to strife or lead to even divorce? And so they will help to guide the conversation into that realm. There could also be things that you're uncomfortable talking about or bringing up on your own, but when a counselor brings it up, it almost gives you permission to talk about certain things. So I will share, these are the 5 areas that my premarital counselor had us to go. We had one session on each of these before we got married. And we did 6 months of premarital counseling, one session a month. And this is 5 sessions. And then the last session was just a free for all. So these are the things that we talked about. Family, spirituality, finances, emotional intimacy, and sex or physical intimacy. What's interesting is we chose a non-Muslim therapist to do our premarital counseling. So there was a little bit of cultural and religious teaching that had to happen to bring the therapist. They needed to understand the perspective that we were coming from, and me probably more so than my husband were coming from and bringing into the space. So just kind of a sensitivity and understanding of what religion and culture has to do with all of these issues. But I want to open up the conversation a little bit around each of these areas and share with you why these topics were so important. So some of you have shared family dynamics as something that's really important. And as a divorce lawyer, I certainly can attest to this, that it's not just in-law drama. Okay, there is in-law drama that's huge that comes up in many strifes amongst couples. But other issues around family are, do you draw boundaries, and how do you draw those boundaries? Are you good at drawing boundaries with family? And I'll start by sharing something. My husband actually said this to me right before the session. He was like, when you say family, most people think of the in-laws or other people. But when you get married, your family is the two of you. That's the family. And then there's extended family. And when he said that, I thought, oh my God, 2 years in, and I still don't see you and this unit as my family. I see my family as my mom and my dad and my brothers. I didn't tell him that, but I was like, oh, that's interesting that that's how you see family, because I now, maybe inshallah, with the baby coming, I will see us as a nuclear unit, as a family, and us in relation to all of these people, which that was interesting. I'm still learning things and figuring things out. So that was something. But boundaries are really important too. So especially around my baby, I've recently, and I share this with you to say that these conversations are happening not only premarital, but post-marriage as well. Communication is something that premarital counseling helped us to explore. How do we communicate about things? How do you have difficult conversations? Because, so for example, my husband comes from, he has a very strong mother. I have a very good relationship with her. But because of the way that I was socialized and my culture, I don't feel comfortable telling her no, or telling her that she needs to leave. I mean, my husband was like, well, if you feel like she's overstayed her welcome, you just need to tell her to leave. And I'm like, what world are you living in? I'm never going to tell her to leave. She could be here for a decade, and I would never say the words, hey, mom, I think it's time for you to go home. And he just doesn't understand that. But anyhow, there's just something like that about drawing boundaries. We've had a lot of conversations lately about how we want to raise our baby, and how that's going to be, frankly, very different than the way other people in our families are raising children. And how do you have those difficult conversations around, no, we can't stay an extra hour because the baby needs to go to sleep and we're following a schedule, or even, so little things like that. But then on a bigger scale, what are your expectations about family? Is there expectation that your family is going to live with you? Are in-laws going to live with you at some point? Are they going to stay with you for an extended period of time? Are you going to live close to them? I have so many people that I've helped in a divorce who have told me, I didn't know that he expected women, a lot of women, but I help men as well, say, I didn't know he expected us to go to his family members every weekend. Like, every weekend we're going and spending time at his parents' house. And I didn't know that that was something that he expected, because he never shared that with me before getting married. Or men saying, I've had several men lately saying, her sisters are in her ear, and her sisters are the ones who want her to get a divorce, or her sisters are the one who are encouraging her to leave me. And when men say things like that, I just, like, in one ear out the other, like, no, that's not what's happening. But in one case, it actually was true. I asked the woman, is your family encouraging you to leave this relationship? She said no. And then 2 weeks later, I got an email from her, I want you to dismiss the divorce. And when I asked her why, she said, it was my sister who wanted me to get divorced. And I said, are you sure? Are you being coerced? I mean, of course, my DV radar went off, like, is someone forcing you to say this? And she was like, no, it always was the case. I just didn't want to admit it to you. So something to think about. Spirituality. So Amani mentioned this a little bit ago. One of the things that we explored a lot, and a lot of you have talked about being reverts or converts to Islam. And my husband is a convert to Islam. And he and I spent a lot of time digging much more deeper than just, do you pray and do you fast and the ritual pieces. I think that was important to me. I was so hyper focused, as I said, on what if what if you don't wake up for Fajr? Like, that's just terrible. I mean, I was so catastrophizing about prayer and things like that, when really I didn't explore. I think that I hadn't effectively explained to my husband why things were meaningful to me. I was more, here are the things that I need you to do, and are you going to do them or not, is how I talked to him. And that was not the right way to communicate, at least in our relationship. It was more important that we explore what spirituality meant, what our relationship with Allah Ta'ala meant, what does daily life look like spiritually versus what does a philosophical spirituality mean? So, we had to have conversations. We still have these conversations about, now I'm delivering early, but I was going to have a Ramadan baby. And that meant his mom would be here. And his mom doesn't observe Ramadan, of course, because she's not Muslim. And she has feelings around eating by herself. She has feelings around eating late at night because she's older and it doesn't work well with her digestive system. So we've had to have a lot of conversations about, how are we going to get around this? Like, are we going to tell her not to come because then she's going to get offended? Do we tell her just to go ahead and eat? Or the very difficult reality, which I was not willing to explore before, but I'm a little bit more warm to it now. Does it mean that you, husband, don't fast a day or two while she's here so that you can eat with her and make her to feel comfortable? That was like shocking to me that I would even consider that, because it's like, it's fard. No, like, of course you're going to fast. Like, this is not a question. But what does that mean for the other person? It's complicated. At least in my life, it was very complicated. So spirituality, going beyond just the surface level of praying and fasting and zakat and hajj and that, but also just what does it mean on a deeper level? Finances, we spent a lot of time talking about financial goals. As a divorce lawyer, I will tell you, finances and sex are two of the biggest issues that come up in my divorce cases. So what are your expectations around finances? What do you need to have versus what are your wants? I was very much like Michelle. Before I got married, I made my own money. I spent my own money. I had my own ideas about what I wanted to do. Frankly, I didn't really care what he wanted in terms of finances. I said, I work hard and I'm going to do what I want to do. And I like nice things. And if I want to buy myself a purse every 6 months, I'm not going to feel guilty about it. And that's how I presented it to him. And that was, again, a cause of conflict, because the way that I spoke about things before I got married, and even now, I'm not perfect right now, I'm still working on it, kind of left no wiggle room for my husband. It was like, I'm not willing to compromise on my money. I'm going to do what I want to do. And so that was, again, a learning curve issue of figuring out how to have those conversations and talking about things like goals, and me frankly admitting that he had real financial discipline and was thinking a lot about, do we want to buy a home? Do you want to retire at some point? Do you want, and I hadn't spent much time thinking about those things, if I'm being honest with myself. And that's when I say that it comes up in divorce, just not to put too fine a point on it, but I think that there's a lot of women who, I see two big trends in finances with divorce in the Muslim community. One big trend that I see, and I don't want to generalize, but I do see it a lot, is that a lot of women have no idea what's happening financially in a marriage. So they are not responsible for the bills. They're not paying the bills. They may be contributing to the bills. I have a client right now who gives, all of what she earns goes into a shared account, but she has no idea, when I asked her, so around when it's time to get divorced, there's a lot of financial questions that come up around how much money is in your accounts, what are your assets, what are your debts, because those are things that get divided at the time of a divorce. And most of my clients have no idea how to answer those questions because they don't know. And so it's very hard to I think it was Sarah was asking about your financial rights in a marriage. It's very hard to advocate and fight for your financial rights when you don't even know what the financial rights are. There's people who are hiding money in accounts. You don't know what those accounts are. It's so easy to go to a bank and open an account and start putting money into it. I could do that today and my husband would have no idea what's going on, that I have a separate account. So something to think about when you're thinking about finances. And I want to spend a little time talking about emotional intimacy and physical intimacy, especially in the religious context. So a lot of people, I do a lot of work in the reproductive justice world and gender-based violence world. And a lot of people, as Sadaf mentioned, my work with Heart, we talk a lot about a lot of this at Heart, is how do you talk about sex before you get married? How do you talk about emotional intimacy before you get married? A lot of people, there's a lot of assumptions that come into play when you're talking about this in the Muslim community. One assumption is that people are not having sex before they're married, or any kind of sexual relationship before they're married. The studies have shown that that is absolutely not true. That frankly, I think the last study that I saw, and I'll have to find it after I talk to you all, but ISPU did a study not too long ago that found that, a little bit less than 50% of Muslim youth are having sex before marriage. So the concept of, oh, how do you talk about sex with your partner before you get married when you're not having sex? That is not necessarily consistent with what the studies have shown. But I want to ask you all, what do you think about talking about both emotional intimacy and physical intimacy with partners prior to marriage? What do we think about that? And how do you have those conversations, whether you're sexually active or not? Stopping sharing for a second, but please unmute yourselves and chat with me.
I think those are, it's just weird, right? Like as for me, someone growing up as a Muslim woman, you kind of just don't talk about those things. Like, it's just not something that I was ever, even in my family, like you just didn't talk about it. So it wasn't discussed at all. I really like that idea of having that discussion with a counselor, just because then it's somebody else asking those questions and not you. And then that whole shyness, it's not coming into play, because with me, that's how it always was. Like, there's some things you just don't talk about, which was hard.
Mm-hmm. What do you guys think? How do you have these conversations? Well, first talk about what does emotional intimacy mean to you? And how would you talk about emotional intimacy with your partner prior to marriage? Have you guys heard of the 5 love languages? Okay, so that's something that is a great tool or resource when talking about emotional intimacy. So, it was before we talked about sex, and my husband and I did talk about sex before marriage, I had a shyness. I was a prude, am a prude. Again, things that you never really think about yourself, because I'm this I'm a feminist, I'm working in the gender space, and this is my career, and I'm happy to talk to all the other people in the world about all of the things related to sex and sexuality and intimacy and sexual assault and violence and good touch, bad touch, and all of the things. With my partner, I had like so much, my guard, I did not want to talk about any of those things with him. And I was like, who am I right now? I don't even understand who I am right now, because the way that I'm showing up in this relationship is very different than the way that I show up in the world. And just to give you context, I mean, I was 36 when I got married. I mean, I was not this, 18-year-old not knowing how to talk about these things. Talking about love languages, I think that was first I had to get around the barrier in my mind that I was actually in a relationship that was potentially ending in marriage. So I was very hands-off, like keep you at a distance kind of a person, because one of the things that I needed to be self-aware of was I so did not want to be defined by a relationship with another person that I held this person at bay for a very long time. It took me a long time to just bring him into the fold that there could be a me with somebody else. And then once I got past that, it was, okay, how do we build this emotional connection and this emotional intimacy before we then talk about a physical intimacy? Love languages helped. It was something that was just a tool and a resource for me to think about how I experience love. And from an intellectual level in the beginning, I was very kind of, I thought, okay, this might be like a little trite or silly. But it's funny how even after marriage, it's coming up to me now that acts of service are hugely important to me, much more than you getting me a gift, because I like to gift myself things. And frankly, I don't think my husband knows what kind of gifts I like. I'm still on that page. So it's like, I would love for you to just wash the dishes, and that really means a lot to me. And one that surprised me was words of affirmation. I didn't think I needed affirmation from a man. I struggle with that idea of getting affirmation from a man. But I do. I want affirmation from my husband. And it's weird. Again, how am I showing up in this relationship versus how I show up in the outside world? These are the things that were important to me. So communication, being able to talk with someone, being vulnerable, a lot of these things that we're talking about is really coming down to vulnerability. And this is going back to your triggers, going back to self-awareness, so that you feel comfortable being vulnerable with somebody else to talk about these things. Is just something that you really need to explore. I believe in being ready for marriage. And then sex. So as Sadaf said, I think somebody else bringing it up, I think, was helpful to me, because, so again, just another real talk. My husband had sexual experience before marriage, and I did not. And so I was like, I have no idea what to, I had all kinds of insecurities around, are you going to know, you're definitely going to know things that I don't know. And what if you don't feel the same things that I feel that you feel? I mean, those are insecurities that are playing in my mind. I'm thinking about it all the time. It's hard to have these conversations, but I would encourage you all, irrespective of, it has nothing to do with whether you have experience or not. It's about a comfortability and a vulnerability in having conversations around these issues before marriage. I didn't know if anyone else had anything to say about that before
Yes,
we got.
yes, I was preparing a class training the chaplains, and sexuality and the spirituality came as one of the topics we need to discuss. And even though some of the classes were only women, we still we don't talk about these issues. And in some classes we had men too. So me and the co-teacher that teaches the class, she's a psychologist, a retired psychologist, came up with questions to ask and to help people talk about it. Even if you ask it to yourself, it will be good to bring that self-awareness. For example, I'm going to post something here in the chat for example, ask this question to yourself as an adolescent. To me, sex was, and choose answer or two, and then other. I'm gonna post another question just as an example. This we need to ask ourselves, and there is a language in it that you can even use with someone else. So a lot of us Muslims, especially maybe girls, can grow up in a conservative, and we're afraid of sexuality. Sometimes we need to bring that to the open, to our counselor if we have pre-marriage counseling, or even to our partner, so they can have that sensitivity and we can have some answers that we need to know how to proceed, So there are ways to ask this question, and I think a counselor would be great to answer, to come up with these questions and help the couple explore. And I think if you explore it even individually beforehand, you will feel more comfortable with the counselor and the partner to answer some of those questions.
Great. Thank you for sharing those questions. The last thing I will share with this about sexuality, as I'm reading these things about shame and dirtiness and things like that as some of the options, I have a lot of friends, Muslim women and otherwise, who have experienced things like pain in sex. They've experienced, discomfort. They have some of it which is psychosomatic, some of it is physical. I have a lot of friends who've gone to sex therapists and sex counselors after marriage with their husbands to explore some of this. And I do think that the way that we're socializing children around sex and sexuality and young adults, and the way are not talking about and avoiding these issues is sometimes manifesting in ways that are impacting people in relationships. So there are people who are asexual for whom that's not an issue, but for a lot of people who want to have a fulfilling sex life with their partner in marriage, pain. I have friends who have been celibate and they've been married for 2 years. They can't have sex with their partner because of the pain associated with it, because of these issues. And it is a very real issue that has come up in so many marriages that I've talked with people about and divorces that I've had. So there's definitely, again, there are physical pieces and there are mental pieces to this, but certainly worth exploring and talking about prior to marriage and during marriage, if that would be helpful to you. Okay, so I want to do a quick case study and then we're going to get into the legal piece of the conversation. It's about 4:54. I'm going to, after we do this case study, I'll give you guys another short break. So just kind of to give you guys a little timeline of where we are. Just to speed things up, I'm going to go ahead and read the case study and open it up to conversation. Ahmed and Crystal are in a dating relationship. Crystal is a new convert to Islam and comes from an African-American Christian background. Early on in their relationship, Ahmed finds out that Crystal was previously married and divorced in her 20s. That divorce caused a great deal of strife between her and her family, and she is just now starting to build her relationship with her parents. Rebuild. Ahmed is Pakistani American, born and raised in a traditional conservative Muslim family. Both Ahmed and Crystal have good jobs and make sufficient money to support themselves. Ahmed has bought a home for himself, where Crystal has enough money to buy a house, but chooses to rent because she thinks that she will end up living with her husband. Ahmed wants to have a big family, but Crystal's not sure about kids because of her own relationship with her parents. Before Ahmed introduces Crystal to his whole family, he chooses to introduce her to his siblings. During the visit, Crystal's previous divorce comes up. She feels very betrayed that Ahmed has told his family about this issue, even though it is something that is deeply impacting their relationship. The next day, Crystal gives everyone in the family the cold shoulder. When she realizes she's being rude, she calls a meeting to apologize and says, I know that I've been acting rude, but I am mad at Ahmed for bringing up these issues. What issues do you all see in this relationship, and what are potential red flags? There's so many of you that are on this call that have been quiet. So I'm looking at you. I'm looking at your names. I want you to tell me what are some issues that you see here and what are some red flags.
I can start. Hi, I'm Raja. So I'll say the first thing is there's clearly a lack of communication between the two of them, that her divorce issue was not something she was ready for his family to find out about. Obviously, I think eventually it would be something she would be comfortable with, but maybe not like the first thing that they know about her. And I can sympathize with that, and that he didn't either take the time to find out, get her permission, because that is her story to tell. And I can also see him as, I'm Pakistani and I'm in a family that if I were to ever bring home a guy who had divorce in the past, how big of a deal it would be for my parents, even if it's not for me. Yeah.
Great. So communication is huge issue, and potentially a red flag for them as a couple. What else is going on here?
I think because of the way her parent acted to her divorce, she's carrying maybe a little bit of shame, or expect her in-laws to act the same way. So she still didn't heal from that injury kind of with her parents.
Yes. So she has some processing that she needs to do with respect to the fact that she was married before and the impact that that has had with her family and now her relationship with Ahmed. Thank you, Amani. What else is going on?
Also, Ahmed wants to have a big family, but Krista is not sure. So that's another red flag that she should they should talk about this and see if that's not going to cause a problem in the relationship.
Yes. So there's some issues around children that's happening where they're aware that there's an issue. He says he wants to have a big family. She doesn't know if she wants a big family or not, but there's nothing in the facts that tell us that they're actually talking to each other about what that means for their family. Okay, what else?
I'm not sure if this is but for me, I feel like her apology with the but to it, she apologized, but there was a but saying Ahmed kind of like made her. So that would be a red flag for me if somebody was to apologize to me and it comes with a but in the end,
Absolutely.
Mm.
I thought the same thing. I actually didn't think she even apologized. She is acknowledging that she was rude, but in the words that she says, she doesn't say, I'm sorry for acting the way that I'm acting. And there's a different way that she could have expressed the second part, that the reason why she's behaving the way that she's behaving has more to do with her relationship with Ahmed than with the family. And so absolutely, I think that the fact that she qualified the apology, it wasn't a real apology, is something that's interesting. Okay, what else?
And another thing, like as I mentioned before, maybe she's not emotionally ready yet to get into another relationship, since talking about the divorce is still like strike a nerve with her to the point that she's really rude and give the people the cold shoulder. That means she herself is not ready to move on, and that's still in the back of her head, and she needs to process that before she can feel comfortable in a new relationship and talking openly about her divorce and move on past that. So I think that's a red flag right there.
Agreed. Okay, good. What else do we think is going on here?
So I kind of think they have differences in like basic core
like values and like things. So like for example, we discussed like some of the other ones, but one of the things also in here is about finances. So how, you know, he's already kind of done what he wanted for himself by purchasing a home, whereas she's kind of hoping that, you know, their relationship will work and then move in with him instead of just going about her life and then changing it when it needs to be changed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think there's definitely a finance issue and maybe a genderedness to this as well. There's like this idea of, I've had so many um friends, and I experienced this to some degree as well in like the Rishta process, which we haven't talked a lot about today. But admitting that I had my own home, I did own my own home before I got married. That was like something that my mom was like, well, I think we should just not tell guys about that. And I was like, why? And again, it was this idea that they didn't need, I didn't need them. And it was I was getting older and guys were not wanting to marry me. And it was part of the reason was this financial thing. And I thought it was very hard for me to hear. And my mom ended up getting over that, of course, because she's the one who encouraged me to buy my own place. But there's a gendered piece to this. There is a financial piece, absolutely a value thing that's going on with the house situation. So thanks for picking that up. Anything else that's going on?
There is, of course, a difference in culture and background. She's from a Christian background, a new convert, and he's from a Pakistani, like Muslim tradition.
Right. So there's like at baseline, before you even get to all these other issues that come up in a relationship, there is a difference in ethnic background, and at least religious upbringing. They may be on the same page as far as religion is concerned now, but in terms of upbringing, there's a difference. Okay, great. You guys identified all the issues. And with that, we're going to get into the legal piece, and it's 5:05 or 5:02. So let me give you 5 minutes. We'll come back at 5:07 to end out the session. Thanks, everyone. Okay, everyone, I don't know if all of you are back, but a lot of you wanted to talk about legal stuff. And so I want to go ahead and get us back to this part of the conversation. So let's talk about the marriage contract. Is the Islamic marriage contract, so let's say we get through all of the pre-work, the marriage readiness, the introspection, the premarital counseling with your partner, and you decided that you are going to be married and it's going to be great, inshallah. Now comes the actual conversation about the marriage contract. What are the requirements in Islam for marriage? At its very simple, basic level, the Islamic marriage contract is quite simple. It has the names of the parties. It has 2 witnesses. It has the amount of the mehr listed. It may have the name of the wali or the guardian, which we'll talk about shortly. It has the date of the marriage. It has the officiant, so if you're getting married with an imam or with another officiant, it'll have their name. And that's it. So those are the main provisions of the marriage contract. Now, a lot of people, when you study, if you are sort of a legal nerd like me, and you study about, marriage in medieval Islamic times, these marriage contracts can be quite sophisticated and quite more complicated than just those simple elements. You can have provisions in there about a wife having the right to divorce, the right to talaq, which we'll talk about in a minute. You can put in there that in the instance that your husband wants to take another wife, you can get a divorce automatically. There's other things that you can negotiate in the marriage contract if you would like. It's like any other contract, it's open to negotiation. So as someone who works in this field on the day-to-day, I don't want to think about the Islamic marriage contract as just a formality. Unfortunately, that's how a lot of communities have reduced the marriage contract to just a formality. The nikah is not seen as, in certain communities, it's not seen as the most important part of the marriage. In fact, I'll get a card that says, the wedding is on Saturday night at 7 p.m. And then you show up to the wedding and the nikah has already happened. And what they meant to say was the dinner or the reception is on Saturday night at 7 p.m. And things like that just irritate me, because to me, like I said, marriage is the most solemn covenant that a person enters into their life. The marriage is actually the nikah. That is the marriage. And then everything that comes beyond it is just another thing that happens when people get married. Is it important in the American context to have the contract? From a legal perspective, yes, marriage contracts are enforceable in courts of law. The only provisions that are not enforceable in courts of law are those that violate public policy. So, for example, if you have a provision of mehr, that is something that is enforceable in a court of law, because it's basically that it's a provision regarding an amount of money or a gift that's given to the bride at the time of marriage. If it hasn't been given, you can enforce the contract before divorce or at the time of divorce. But if you have something like bigamy in the marriage contract, that's something that is not going to be enforceable in an American court, because in most states in the United States, bigamy is not considered legal or valid. And so any provisions around bigamy or polygamy are automatically going to be unenforceable in courts of law. If you have questions about that, let me know. But yes, Islamic marriage contracts are absolutely relevant in American courts. And You want to be aware that people understand what the Islamic marriage contract is. Let's talk a little bit about Islamic divorce. There's 3 types of divorce in Islam. There's talaq, khula, and tafriq. Tafriq is not necessarily relevant in the American context. It's like a judicial divorce, similar to the American process for divorce, where you go before a judge and a judge decides how to resolve the conflict. Because we don't have Islamic courts in the United States, that doesn't really take place here. Talaq and khula, though, are both types of divorce that happen in the United States. And what is a talaq? It's a unilateral divorce, usually initiated by the husband. Can a woman give a talaq divorce? What do you guys think? You can chat in the chat box if you don't want to unmute. Oh, there's something happening in the chat box.
No.
No. Ooh, we have 2 votes for no.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. And then someone says she can give a khula.
Could I speak?
Of course.
So from I'm originally from Pakistan. Of course, have been here for such a long time. But over there, people usually, in my contract, they ask, does the lady have the right to divorce? So, and we wrote whatever, yes or no. But in customary, it is there that say the man can give the talaq and female can get khula, the divorce.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they do. I'm not sure if
Sure.
Religious or cultural or mixed.
Sure. So yeah, so first, thank you for sharing that. In Pakistan, it's interesting. I handle a lot of divorces of Pakistani couples. And if you get married in Pakistan, there's actually a provision in the marriage contract that you get from the clerk or from, the official folks that says that the wife shall have the right to a talaq. And then every single contract I've ever seen, and I've done this for more than 10 years, that provision is crossed out with a pen. So it's there and it's crossed out with a pen every single time. So a woman can give a talaq. It has to be written in the marriage contract that the husband it's called the isma. She has the isma in her hand, which is the right to give a unilateral divorce. She can negotiate that prior to getting married to her husband, that he gives her his right to divorce. He gives that to her as well. Why is this important? Why? So yes, to answer some of y'all's questions about khula, yeah, well, why does a woman need the right to give a talaq when she has the right to give a khula? Okay. Why does that matter? In many schools of thought, the khula is the divorce that the wife gives to the husband. The reason it matters is because of the mehr. So a lot of you have asked about the mehr. How do you negotiate the mehr? How do you talk about the mehr? The mehr or sadaq is in Islamic marriage contracts is a marital gift given to the bride at the time of the marriage. It is given to the bride at the time of the marriage. I'm going to underscore that exclamation point bold. It is not an issue of divorce, okay? It is not something that only becomes relevant at the time of divorce. It is an issue of marriage. It is something that is negotiated prior to the marriage, and it is her right to receive at the time of marriage or at any time during the marriage upon demand. And only if he has not given it to her at any time the way he should have, then and only then does it become an issue of divorce. And it is the superior debt on a husband at any given time in his life, meaning that he has to give, if he has not given it to her during the marriage or at the time of marriage, at the time of divorce, before any other divorce debt is settled, her mehr is given to her first, and then you settle all the debts. If he dies and has not given his wife her mehr, the first thing that comes out of his estate is the mehr, and then all the other funeral expenses, other debts at the time of divorce come out. It is the most important debt upon a husband. It is the right of the bride and not anyone else. I don't like to call it a dowry. We're not buying her in marriage. We are giving her a gift that solemnifies the marriage. It shows that a husband is serious about being married and is willing to give her a gift. It doesn't have to be financial. It doesn't have to be money. It doesn't have to be jewelry. It can be something else as well. It could be a trip to Hajj. I have a friend who got her law school tuition paid for by her husband as the mahar. I chose a piece of jewelry for my mahar. I didn't want money. I wanted it up front and I wanted it on the day of our wedding. And so I demanded that I get it that way. Different people have different things that they ask for, and the wife is entitled to ask for her mahar, whatever she wants. Now, some of you have asked, so what's the difference between a talaq and a khula? In a talaq divorce initiated by a husband, a woman gets her mahar regardless. So she gets her mahar, she's going to get it. There is no question that she gets her mahar. Okay. In a khula that is initiated by the wife, there's a story. So there's a story at the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, where a woman came to him and said, I want to be divorced from my husband. Is it possible? And he says, what's going on? Sure, it's possible. Tell me what's going on. And she says, I just don't like him. He's a good man. I just don't like him. And some of the narrations of this hadith say, I don't like the way he looks, so I'm not attracted to him. Is it possible for me to get a divorce? And the Prophet Muhammad says, yes, you can get a divorce. And what did he give you at the time of the marriage? And she says, this is what he gave me at the time of the marriage. I'll give that back. And even after marriage, he gave me a garden. I'll give him back the garden. I don't want anything from him. I'll give him back everything. And the Prophet ﷺ says, as to what he gave you at the time of marriage, yes, you return it. As to the garden, no, you don't return that. So from this story, scholars have extrapolated that in the event of a khula, where a wife initiates a divorce, she has to give back the mahar. That is why it's important who gives the difference between a talaq and a khula. That's one of the reasons that there is a difference between the two, and it is why it's important. What happens, and I do a lot of abuse work, what happens in a lot of abuse cases is that men will wait to give a divorce. They will not give the divorce because they know that when they wait it out, and the wife finally initiates, they get out of giving the mahar, because then it would be considered a khula, and then she would have to give back the financial gift and he would never have to pay it. That to me is abuse of the story, because in the story, it is very clear that there's nothing abusive or wrong with this man. This woman is not coming to the Prophet and saying that she was harmed. She's not saying that she was abused. She was not saying that he was a bad husband or that he wasn't taking care of her or that he cheated on her or any of those things. She's saying he's a good man. I just don't like him. Is that reason enough to be divorced? Or not being attracted to him, is that reason enough to be divorced? And the Prophet ﷺ says, yes, in that scenario, you shouldn't financially benefit from the divorce, and you should give back your mahar. But the story doesn't talk about what about in an abuse case and the wife initiates a divorce. And I would argue, and many scholars would argue, that in the case of abuse or harm or something bad happening, you would be entitled to your mahar, because that's would be an abuse and further abuse of your rights, is to not only that you experience abuse in the marriage, but now you also have no financial rights. So that's the main difference between a talaq and a khula. And most people in the US will have Islamic divorces in addition to civil divorces in the state they're in. Someone asked if I do divorces in Florida. I'm not licensed in Florida. I'm licensed only in Georgia and Tennessee. So unfortunately, I don't handle divorces in Florida, but I can answer general questions about divorce. Another thing that some of you asked about, how do you think about mehr? How do you think about calculating mehr? So there's going to be varying opinions about this. Okay. On the one hand, so Imam Majid and I talk about this a lot. I mentioned him early on in the presentation. One thing that he talked to me about was he thinks it's silly to negotiate non-financial things as mehr. So, I had a story once of an Egyptian man. He married a Bangladeshi woman. They have a beautiful marriage. And she wanted as her mehr that he read one verse of the Quran every night. And make dua for her. So he reads one verse of the Quran and then he prays for her. That was her request for the mehr. So I was like, oh, that's so sweet. And I was telling Imam Majid about this, like, it's so nice. They have like this like bond and they're praying for each other. And that's what she wanted. And he looked at me and he was like, Aisha, no. Like, yes, that is sweet. And yes, you should read Quran. And yes, you should pray for your spouse. And that's beautiful. But that's not the point of the mehr. The point of the mehr is financial security. And so, the thing is with the way that divorce worked, especially if you are not in the American context where you could get equitable distribution. And what I mean by that is, in addition to the mehr, which is a gift at the time of marriage, at the time of divorce, you're entitled to half of what's in the retirement account in most states, half of what's in the retirement accounts, half of what's in the cash accounts, and that kind of a thing. In Muslim majority countries, there may not be a similar context of equitable distribution. And so the mehr might be the only thing that you're walking away from. And so some people feel that when you're negotiating the mehr, you should think about immediate financial security. So I've had some imams and scholars tell me, think about, 3 months of 3 months of expenses paid so that you can get back on your feet after a divorce. By the way, that should not be confused with the 3 months of iddah. So in an iddah, where you're separated before the divorce is finalized, a husband in Islam, a husband still has to provide financially at the level that you enjoyed during the marriage, during the iddah. So even if you are separated and living in another place, it is a man's obligation to continue to provide financially during the iddah. Then what scholars will say is calculate what you may need for the next 3 months after that. So after the divorce is final, and whatever you need for the 3 months after should be what you negotiate as your mehr. I have seen so many different philosophies on this. So in Iranian communities, I've never seen a mehr that is less than $100,000. That is like the baseline. And then I have like seen something as small as, something that's just a symbolic like token, that's given at the mehr. So it really, really, really varies to the person who's getting married. I would think about what does the mehr mean to you? So again, it is a gift. It's not a payment. It is your right. It is not the right of your father or your mother to dictate. It's not the right of your family to dictate of what you want. It's something that you need to think about for your own self of what is important to you. And that could be, but the things that you want to think about are, do I see the mehr as financial security? Do I see it as something that's more symbolic? Is there something that I really want that I can negotiate up front? So for me, it was very important that this was not some nebulous thing that came in the future. I wanted my mehr upfront. I wanted it now. I wanted it to be something that I wore every day. It's my ring. That's what I wanted. That was important to me because it was a gift showing me that this man was serious about our marriage. To other people, you know, they want something different. So I feel like I can't guide you necessarily on what you want because that's something that you need to think about yourself. But the mahar is, it's the absolute right of the bride. Now, in a legal context, what I had said before that it's enforceable in a court of law. So there are many lawyers, including myself, that are setting precedent around the country in getting the provision of the mahar enforced in American courts. And the way that you do that is by saying, this is just a contract like any other contract between two people. The marriage contract is like any other contract. And so we need to enforce it as a contract. And that's how it becomes enforceable. There's nothing violating public policy when it comes to a gift. It's not like bigamy or polygamy that does violate public policy. There's nothing like that. And so we haven't really had pushback. There is some pushback that this is, Islamic law is coming into American courts and that kind of a thing. And that's where your lawyer needs to steer the conversation away from Islamic law and focus on it being a contractual provision that needs to be enforced. I think there are some questions in the chat box. So if you guys have any questions, you can unmute, but I'm gonna take a second to read really quickly what's happening in the chat box. And of course, it's not clicking or opening for me. Here we go. Okay. Okay, the email address, you'll have it at the end of the session, so you'll get that. Oh, and you already, somebody already shared it. Great. Is equitable distribution allowed for us to take as females in Islam when iddah is provided? Okay, iddah is the separation. So I think what you mean is the mehr. Yes. So yes, every scholar that I have talked to has said you are absolutely allowed to take an equitable distribution after mehr, because even in this is where the free conversation comes in. So even in Muslim majority countries, there was a medieval, thousands of years ago case that I read in Morocco where a husband and a wife owned a store together. They owned some kind of business. And upon death, the wife got her share of the inheritance that is Islamically mandated, and she got her mehr. And then the husband, the children got their share of the inheritance. So this is not exactly a divorce scenario, but it is equitable distribution because the wife started a case where she felt cheated that she had been working so hard to help invest in this business. And she worked in the business and she and her husband built it together. And it was so interesting because in Islam, a woman is compensated financially, can be compensated in terms of a woman's financial rights for housework because she has no obligation to do housework, for breastfeeding because she has no obligation to do breastfeeding. So what happened is they went to a court, they didn't just have this agreement between the kids, and the judge said, did you ever, clean the house and take care of the house and tend to the house? And she said, yes, of course. And so he took some of the kids' portion and put it back into the wife's portion. And then he said, did you breastfeed? And she said, yes, I fed 4 children. And he said, great. And then he took some more out of the kids' provision and gave it to the wife. And then just went systematically down all of these things that a lot of us take advantage of, that women are doing in the home that they don't have an obligation to do. And it just chipped away at the kids' rights and put, more favor in the wife's rights. And I think, again, so to some of you who have asked previously about what are a woman's financial rights, there is nothing in Islam that underscores women's rights more and feminism more than in the conversation of financial rights. So if you start reading about women's financial rights, it is amazing to me how so many men and communities are abusing women financially because there's so much in our tradition of women having financial independence. So even in inheritance, everyone wants to get, hot and bothered about the fact that girl children get less than male children. Yeah, that's true. But the question is, why is that true? It's true because there is no obligation on a woman's dollar. So any dollar that I spend in this house for groceries, for food, for anything for my child, for my husband, it is a sadaqah. I'm getting like ajr for spending my money for my family. And if I said today, I'm not spending a single dime on this house ever again, I'm going to put all my money in my own account, my husband has no right to say, nope, can't do that. I mean, look, go back to the previous conversation about financial considerations on all of that. Definitely talk to your partner about what your goals are. But from an Islamic perspective, I have no obligation to support anyone in my family or provide anyone with any money. What happens in practice is that women are spending all of their money on family and children and all of the things. So by the time divorce does come around or the time of inheritance comes around, women are financially sometimes worse off. But in terms of what Islam says, no. A lot of men get really angry when you say your money is my money and my money is my money. But that's frankly what has been established in Islam. If I don't want to clean my house, my husband, if he has the money, has to provide me with a housekeeper. If I don't want to breastfeed my child, my husband has to figure out a way to feed my child. Does this make women seem callous? Maybe, but that's again how we're socialized in the modern context. It's more about, and the Prophet Muhammad peace be upon him said this in his final khutbah, that the marriage contract is not a service contract. Marriage is not about service specifically of the wife to the husband. Marriage is about partnership. It is about two people coming together go back to 10 slides to what the Quran says about marriage. It's about affection and love and mercy, tranquility. That's what marriage is. It's not a service contract where you're getting someone to come into your home to cook and clean and have children and rear your children for you without compensation. And so I think that, that's where the equitable distribution argument comes in. We've already talked about what a tafriq is, but yes, this is where a judicial divorce, which is before a judge, is where a lot of these issues would come up. So you would argue things like compensation for or rights and equity. And in the US, we call it sweat equity. There's sweat equity arguments. So like if one person has been in the context of alimony, for example, if one person has been at home, not advancing their career, taking care of kids, not advancing their education or training or certifications and whatnot, while the other one is prevailing in all of the ways, is it fair for him to walk away with half and for her to walk away with half? A lot of judges would say no. She should walk away with more because her earning potential is way less. So these are Islamic notions as well as issues in the US. Okay, we have some direct messages about divorce. I filed for divorce almost a year and a half back. It's still pending. Never got the mahar during the marriage. He spent the mahar on my classes, so he paid it for school. Do I need to give him that money back? I have not gotten a khula Islamically. We'll go to the imam after the divorce is over. if he says that that was his, if that was your negotiation, that the mehr was to be spent on tuition, and he did spend it on tuition, it's already spent. And I feel like, without knowing more about, you filed, I understand, but like I said before, just because you filed, it doesn't mean that there isn't a reason for why you're getting a divorce. Like that story at the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, was there was no reason for the divorce other than an attraction issue, or she just didn't like him. So I think that would be a factor to consider. But my gut is going to tell me, no, you don't need to give back your tuition money. It's already been spent. It's not something that's just sitting around. If it was something that was sitting around and it was tangible to give back, I think that would make sense. You can't give him your degree back, for example. Someone else asks you, why do you need 2 divorces, one in court and one with the imams? You don't. There's a lot of people who say that you don't need to have an Islamic divorce. A divorce in the courts is recognized in Islam, and that's sufficient. And a lot of imams will do that now. So if getting religiously divorced is very important to you, there are a lot of imams that say, go through the civil process, and when it's done, show me your divorce decree and I'll write you a certificate of divorce from the masjid or from an Islamic perspective. Some people, it's really important to them to get an Islamic divorce. So I don't want to poo-poo that, but others will say, no, if you're divorced civilly, then you're divorced. There's nothing else to do Islamically. It just really depends. Is
I have
alimony?
a question. Aisha, can I interrupt you 1 second? I have a question related to that, but does that apply for nikah? Like if you got a civil, marriage contract like done, like you just went to the courts, is that considered that you're Islamically married? Because somebody's asked me that.
Definitely. Yeah, we've had, I had an interesting case not too long ago where a couple got civilly married. They slept together and got pregnant before they had a nikah. And it was like the end, it was like World War III. And then they were thinking about getting a divorce, and the parents were like, wait a second, you're not even married. And there was a lot of drama. But yes, I mean, again, I think that, what is a nikah? Like, let's go back to what a nikah is. It is consent of 2 parties. It is done in the presence of witnesses. Most civil marriages are also done in the presence of witnesses. So it's not, just you and a judge. Usually there are witnesses that attest to having witnessed the marriage at the courthouse. So I think that a lot of people would argue that the essential elements of a nikah were met in a civil court marriage. I think that, I do think that different people will say that the nikah is important to do still because of the duas that happen, and it has to be publicized. So it's interesting because in the context of secret marriage, a lot of people are talking about how ishar, or the publication of marriage, is very important. And a lot of people will do a nikah in public with a lot of people present. And so they'll know, not always, but that there will be that element also satisfied. Whereas in a court marriage, maybe the whole community is not aware that people are married. So there's some who may say without the publication or ishar of the marriage, it's not sufficient. But in my opinion, if you're what, the imams that I've talked to and the scholars that I've talked to have said is that if you're married or divorced civilly, because Islam follows the law of the land, you are married and or getting divorced. Someone asked if alimony and child support is allowed in Islam. Absolutely. Child support for sure. I mean, a man's responsibility to his children is always definite and forever in Islam. There's not, until they reach adulthood and are handling business on their own. So there's no question about child support. Alimony, different people, again, different scholars have different opinions on this. Some people say, no, your financial support ends at the mehr, and you should not get more. That's different than equitable distribution, because equitable distribution is something that you have invested in yourself. Alimony is something that is above and beyond that you're giving for support. And a lot of scholars will say, no, there shouldn't be alimony, but a lot of people say that they should. So, and if you didn't get a mehr, the question is, why didn't you get the mehr? So if you need to go and fight for that, if it was in your contract or not, that's what you need to do.
May I add something, Aisha, about the alimony? It is called the nafaqah. It is mentioned in the Quran. I know many scholars don't acknowledge it. But actually, if you go to the fourth school of Sunni, you will find some scholar acknowledging and say, such as Ibn al-Qayyim and others, that says the nafaqah of divorce, called the nafaqat al-mut'a, was different than nafaqat al-idda. Idda is the 3 months or 3 period.
Right.
And nafaqat al-divorce is mentioned clearly in the Quran. Unfortunately, some scholars don't acknowledge it, but it is there.
No, nafaqah is definitely there. And thank you for bringing that up. Absolutely. It is definitely in the Quran. If you, Imani, if you have the verses on nafaqah, if you could share those. I don't have those handy. And I was going to
share it.
Great. Yeah. No, of course. And I'm glad you distinguish between the nafaqah of idda, which is for sure those 3 months of support and maintenance. And then there's after as well. But again, I would consult, there are various schools of thought. So I would consult the scholars that are trusted in your own community to ask those questions. But I have many Muslim women who are receiving alimony and have had no issue. Imams have had no issues saying, oh, interesting. Do the witnesses need to be Muslim? That's so interesting. I thought about this myself because one of my witnesses is not Muslim. The reason why I did that in our marriage was because one of the issues that I have noticed in a divorce, in divorces in our community, is that especially where there's converts involved, they'll have the 2 witnesses from the person who's not, if there's a person who's not a convert, that person, they'll have the 2 witnesses from one side, basically. And at the time of a divorce, I'm not saying that witnesses lie, but if they're biased, that can impact what happens at the time of the divorce. So people may remember things differently. So mehr, for example, mehr is written into the marriage contract, but imams, and I feel this way too, often feel, and a lot of people feel, that it's uncouth or gauche to talk about the mehr in the nikah. So like when I was younger, they would say, and the mehr is negotiated at $50,000. And everyone's like, whoa, she got $50,000 in it. I just always felt like that cheapened the nikah. But I now know why people say it out loud in the ceremony, and it's because there's all these people who have now heard it. Whereas if you keep it private and you just announce that the mehr has been negotiated by the parties and it's in the contract, a witness may forget. Frankly, I don't know if my witnesses, one was my brother and one, I made my husband pick someone on his side, so there would be no bias, one from each side, very fair. I have no idea if my brother even knows what the mehr is, or what his best man knew what the mehr was. I don't know, but it was definitely disclosed to them and discussed with them before. So they should, if they don't remember, they don't remember. But I think that I don't think that there was an issue with us having a non-Muslim as a witness, but I don't want you guys to take, that is one thing I haven't studied Islamically. So maybe Amani knows, but okay. If the woman earns more than the man, will he still be ordered to pay child support? It really depends on the jurisdiction that you're in. Child support is usually based on income, and it's based on, in some places, it's based on visitation. It also is based on who is the primary custodian of the children. So if the husband is the primary custodian, the woman in Georgia would have to pay child support, whether she makes more money or not. If the mom is the primary custodian, then the father has to pay child support, irrespective of the amount of child support that they have to pay is based on their salary. But who pays it to whom depends on who's going to be the primary parent. Alimony, same thing. So in the United States, that is not governed by Islamic law. A woman can be ordered to pay alimony to her husband. From an Islamic perspective, that would be inappropriate, but that's another thing to be argued a different day. There is not a Sharia court in the United States that solves divorce issues. If masajid can't handle it or refuse to handle it, masajid should not handle divorces. They're not lawyers. They're also usually not scholars at masajid that can handle divorce. There are, mediators who are Islamically trained and who are scholars who are also trained in mediation that can help guide couples in a divorce. But there's not many of those, to be frank. So I just don't think that most of our masajid around the country are equipped to deal with divorce issues. And certainly they're not consulting with attorneys in their communities when dealing with these issues most of the time. Some are, most aren't. I know that the session is almost over and it's become a little bit of a Q&A, but there's one issue that I wanted to bring forward in this case study. This is the last thing we're going to talk about anyway. So I'm going to let you guys read the case study while I answer the rest of the questions in the chat box. And then we'll discuss the case study and we'll close out today. Oh, sorry. Okay. So great. Thank you for your comments in the chat box. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about, I'll still stay on if you guys have any other questions, but I wanted to address this case study really quickly. Okay, what are the issues that you guys see going on in this case? What do you do if you are this community leader? And what are the issues that you see potential problems?
the girl was lied to. She should have been informed that this is her second marriage of the man, I believe.
Okay. So this was a COVID excused secret second marriage that was happening. So we're seeing a lot of issues of second marriage or secret marriage in the Muslim community. But yeah, she should have been informed. The husband is using COVID and quarantine as an excuse to marry her without telling anyone that he's already married. What else is going on in this case?
Well, she doesn't have like any official document kind of to get her rights through court or so. I know the Islamic marriage contract, which could be just again very simple and ceremonial. So she may not have rights because of that.
Mm-hmm. So generally speaking, when you are a second wife and there's already a first wife that is legally documented as a legal spouse, the second spouse has no right. You're a girlfriend. I mean, or a mistress is really what the law would look at you as. So you certainly have no rights, legal rights. You have no financial rights. You may have some financial rights Islamically, and this is where the mehr comes in as a conversation, but civilly, you don't have a right to divorce. You don't have a right to equitable distribution, alimony, no, anything. Just out of curiosity, do you guys know if they have kids, what happens? Okay. If they have children, they would not be legitimate children or considered legitimate children. And so before you would get child support, you have to do the father has to do what's called a legitimation proceeding of establishing paternity before he would be ordered to pay child support, which from a cultural and religious perspective to a Muslim woman can be very offensive, that anyone would consider her children to be illegitimate because she has entered into a nikah and feels very strongly that she's in a legitimate marriage. But according to the law in most states in the United States, any children born out of marriage are not considered legitimate and have to establish paternity before a father is ordered to pay child support. So something else to consider. Any other issues that you guys see?
Assalamu alaikum. Not disrespect to the imam, but I feel like sometimes so you have to be very careful. The imams that you get involved with, even with the divorce situation, the imams that you get involved with in your situation, because the imam knew and didn't tell her. And I want to think that should have been his responsibility to either to tell him to tell her or tell her, because I've heard that even though backbiting is haram, that's one of the few times that it's allowed because of the long-term effect of marriage and family and all that.
Absolutely. So what is the role of and obligations of an imam or someone who's officiating the marriage? This is also where a wali, we had talked a little bit that we were going to come back to the wali conversation, or a guardian. A lot of people think that that's a patriarchal notion, that a woman doesn't have the right to consent or the ability to consent without the presence of a wali, which is usually a male guardian. Although we know, folks who know Islamic history know that Aisha Rahman has served as a wali in her niece's marriage. So there is precedence for women being walis as well. But the idea is, did the imam have a responsibility to disclose either to the wali of this bride or to the bride herself or to the community at large to say something about the fact that he was aware that he was already married, that the groom was already married to somebody else. And I would argue absolutely he had an obligation to disclose that information. Again, in the context of polygamy, it's interesting. Different madhahib have different views on whether the wife number one needs to be informed about wife number two. But a lot of scholars are silent about what wife number two needs to know about or not know about. There's a lot of scholars who will say wife number one needs to know. Some scholars will say she needs to give permission. But what is wife number two? What information is she entitled to is interesting. But I think when you read the verses in the Quran that talk about polygamy, it's very narrow. If you believe that it's legal, it's in a very narrow context where you can treat the spouses equitably. And then the Quran later says that you, in fact, can't treat equitably or fairly, especially with respect to something like love. But I think that it's important here to know from a legal perspective, without having any rights, that question of equity comes in. So is it fair or equitable for a woman to engage in a marriage without knowing that she has no rights? And I think that, again, going back to the spirit of Islamic law from the verses of the Quran and what the spirit connotes is that there shouldn't be any, there's no fairness in that. And so there's no justice. The spirit of Islamic law is, of course, justice. Okay.
I have a quick question before you say
Sure.
bye to us.
Sure.
On the scenario. So if there, is that okay for me to ask, or
Of
do you want
course,
to?
by all means, go ahead.
So the question is, if we can have a civil marriage, why can't then there be only one marriage in as it is in United States? That's the law, that you can only have one. So as according to our religion, depending on where you are, you follow that particular law. So why can't it be a law that you can only have one marriage? Why do imams kind of foresee this second marriage over here, where the woman doesn't get the rights, the kids do not get the rights, and so-called it's legitimate and illegal, kind of?
So, I mean, that's like the $1 million question, right? So I think that a lot of what I have heard from imams or people who would conduct these ceremonies is that there are ways to fulfill the financial rights. You're not going to get the right of divorce, but there are ways to fulfill the Islamic rights, financial rights of the second wife or the third wife that have nothing to do with the law. So like there are men, I mean, I think this is a little ridiculous because frankly, we see the abuse of it a lot more, but what will happen is they will represent to the imam who's conducting their marriage that, yeah, I'm going to buy her a house and I'm going to go and share her bed and I'm going to share my first wife's bed as equally at the same time. And I'm going to give her her mahar and I'm going to give her, I'm going to take care of my children that would come from the second marriage. And I'm going to do all the things that I need to do in terms of her huquq. And the only thing that she's not going to get is in the event of divorce, she's not going to get a civil divorce, but we'll give her an Islamic divorce. And a lot of imams are okay with that. They say, okay, yeah, I'm going to take your word for it. And that's great, you know, and so I'll conduct this nikah because in Islam, I think it's valid to have more than one spouse, more than one wife. I think that I'm speaking from the perspective of the fact that a lot of times this does not happen, you know, so it does not happen that the man is actually fulfilling all of the things that he said. And so what mechanism of accountability do we have? In the Muslim community, we don't have a mechanism of accountability because if imams try to get involved and say, why aren't you doing what you were supposed to do? Either we have imams who say, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to intrude or interfere. Or they'll just say, well, I told him that he needs to do it, and it's not my job to figure out if he does or not. And that's why the civil divorce matters, because in the absence of accountability from a community perspective, we have accountability from a legal perspective. And our legal system is not perfect either. I mean, obviously, you all know that the legal system is very flawed, as so many of you have mentioned in the chat box of not getting your rights legally either. What I'm encouraging is, to the degree that you can set some safeguards in place, it's important to do so, but recognizing that, it's not a perfect world for women regardless. I know that Sadaf says that there's going to be a whole other session on divorce. So, I know you guys have a lot of questions about divorce. I was really trying to tie in the mahar and negotiating the mahar as it relates to divorce, because that's where it becomes an issue a lot of times. But there's definitely going to be a lot more information forthcoming vis-a-vis divorce. But if you guys have any other questions,
I have one thing, Aisha, that I think we didn't really touch on too much, is just the wali. I think, who can be a wali? Like, I know you mentioned that Aisha radiallahu an was, but in my culture, it's just usually the dad, right? Like, so what are those requirements? Does it have to be somebody who's in a guardian kind of position, or is it somebody that just what exists in that Islamic law about that, rules and regulations regarding the wali?
So I think that it becomes complicated. So I think there's what is the point of the wali, and then what happens in the context of, do you have to be a guardian? So, for a lot of people who have converted to Islam, for example, they feel like there is no person in their life, if there's no other Muslim, male or female, that are older, or responsible for them later in life, that's kind of silly. It's silly to say, because what is happening, unfortunately. So before I talk about Islamic law, I'm going to tell you about the reality. The reality on the ground is that a lot of convert women are told that they need to have a wali, and they don't have someone in their own family or structure that can serve in that purpose. And so they seek out a potential wali in the community, and that wali is like not really a wali that's looking out for the best interest of the woman, and is actually committing more harm. So I come at this not from a scholarly perspective, but from a practitioner's perspective of what I know about Islam and what I'm seeing as a reality on the ground. And I'm going to go back to the basics of understanding the spirit of Islamic law, in which justice is supreme. So justice, adala, is the most important thing when you're talking about Islamic law. So to me, a wali in theory is going to be someone who's looking out for your best interests, who is negotiating on your behalf if you need someone to negotiate on your behalf, someone who is that is that enforceability mechanism. So like, for example, if a woman has negotiated a mahar of $1,000, and the husband shows up at the wedding with $500, instead of the bride who's all dressed up, and yes, she has the ability to consent, and yes, she has the ability to question these things on her own, instead of her going and saying, hey, where's my other 500, the wali would step in to say, hey, hold on a second, this is what we negotiated. Why are you, stiffing her at this point? Imam Majid has a great example that he gives me all the time. After we had a wali gone wrong, mahar gone wrong situation, he was very proud. He called me one day and he said, there's a man who promised his bride, a car at the time of the marriage. And so before I married him, he wasn't serving in the role of a wali, he was the officiant. But he said, I want you to show me the title of the car, because I need to make sure that you own this vehicle before you promise it to somebody else. And the guy was like, oh yeah, it's my car. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. And he was like, no, I'm not going to do the nikah until you go get the title and show it to me. And it was because we had a case where a man was promising properties and shares of properties and condos and God knows what to a bride, and come to find out that he actually didn't own any of the things that he promised to his bride, and she didn't know any better. And so that's where a wali comes in. Like, there are some investigations, just like when we were talking about in the premarital counseling context of, would you rather a premarital counselor bring these issues up as opposed to bringing them up yourself? If you have a situation where you need someone to do some due diligence and to do some background check and criminal record check and check about your finances, that's where a wali comes in. So the wali is supposed to be a person who is responsible for the well-being of the bride, not necessarily this patriarchal notion of giving consent on her behalf. That's what it comes down to, and a lot of times. So there's a lot of, even in Pakistani culture, there is this idea that the bride will be sitting in a separate room, and the wali will come and ask the bride, does she consent to the marriage? And you have to ask 3 times. And if she says yes, then the wali is the messenger that goes from the bride's room to the groom's room and says, yes, she's given consent. And a lot of times culturally, the father, uncle, or brother, whomever is like, oh, I know she consents, so I'm just going to say that she consents. That's not the Islamic method. Okay. You have to ask the bride. And the reason why she's sitting separately is because there are instances where women are coerced into marriage. And so even though as an American woman or someone who was born and raised here, I felt really weird the first time I saw this, that the bride was in a separate room as the rest of us who were sitting with the groom. I came to recognize that there are people who are forced into marriage. And if she's in a separate room, she has more freedom to say, no, I don't want this marriage. And she can like run away, literally run away, and no one, it's not like this embarrassing thing in front of 500 people. And so, there's, the wali is supposed to be, traditionally is a male guardian or a guardian that is taking care of the interests of the bride and looking out for her best interest, looking out for what she's doing. I brought up the issue of Aisha radiallahu anha because her niece's father was actually away at a battle or some kind of war that was happening, and they got a really great proposal and they didn't want to pass it up. And Aisha radiallahu anha said, your dad isn't here, so I'm going to step into this role because this guy is great. And I think that for people like us, that's an amazing example of the fact that you can look out for your own best interest. And then of course we know about Khadija radiallahu anha, who was negotiating everything on her own before she got married, right? So the first example of marriage in Islam was Khadija radiallahu anha and the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And their marriage was all about her negotiating her rights. She was the money person in the relationship. She was the one who consented, recently, and this is the end of the conversation, so I don't want to have this conversation right now, but Amani, I'm going to put you on this for your help with my research on this. I have recently learned that people believe that women who are virgins do not have the ability to consent or something of that nature, and they need to have a wali to engage in marriage. I had not, to be fair, in all of my years of research and study, I had never heard this before, but it came up in the Bayan class, Sadaf. And after that, it came up like 3 more times. I actually started asking people, like, is this a thing? And apparently it is something that's floating out there. So I have not had the time or the energy to research that and consult with scholars, but I will throw that out there because some of you may have heard that as well. Unfortunately, can't give you an answer to that just yet.
Unfortunately, we hear this opinion because there is different mazahib with different opinions, but there is nothing really in the Quran or very clear in the Hadith, because the wali must be a just person. So there are cases if the wali want to force the woman or into marriage, even if she's a virgin, she has the right to actually go, or he's refusing a person, or he's a good man, but he's refusing it for unjust or un-Islamic causes. She has the right to go to a judge and ask him to be a wali. Like she can appoint her own wali or represent her own self also in some madhab. So, or ask a woman to represent her, or in modern days, even I see attorneys can be kind of a wali in modern days agreements. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I say something that I also recently learned? That's a wali's job ends once the contract is signed, and then the wilaya becomes into the new husband's hand. Is that true? So my question is, like, if there's an issue, whatever, what will be the role, the role of the wali in the future if if this wali is no longer her wali, her husband is?
There
That's
is
what
nothing like that in the Quran that says, it actually says المؤمنون والمؤمنات بعضهم أولياء بعض. The believing women and the believing women are awliya, wali for one another.
For one another. That's right.
Yeah, for one another. So, but the wali as a witness, as someone who represents, as an agent who represents someone in a contract, and the two witnesses, they also a witness is not ceremonial only. They are supposed to be witness for a contract that has conditions, and if this condition is broken, then they can bring the witnesses to testify, the wali to testify, and so forth.
Right. And remember that, again, everything in Islam that talks about marriage talks about it as a partnership and a companionship where there isn't this power differential. So this power differential of one having more power than the other is not, there are several verses in the Quran that talks about, even the one that talks about the Qawamun verse, it's talking about strengths. So different partners have different strengths. That's not gendered. A woman may have certain strengths over a man, and a man may have certain strengths over a woman. And the Quran talks about that. So this idea, I would be very hesitant to believe anything that says that a man should have some kind of inherent power over the woman in terms of witnessing or talking about things or guardianship, because like Amani said, there's that verse that she mentioned. There's another verse that is very similar. It repeats it almost exactly the same way, that spouses are guardians over each other. And it's not just, a man is a guardian over his wife, and a wife is a guardian over her husband. It's more about protection than it is about a power dynamic. And so just kind of something to think about. Sadaf, I think you wanted to say something.
I just wanted to say it's already 6:15, 6:16. So I know we kept you 15 minutes longer than we promised. So if anybody needs to head out, we really appreciate you being here. And I wanted to let you all know that we will be having 2 more sessions in this series. The next session will be in a couple months. So they'll be quarterly. The next one will be coming up in June, inshallah. And that will be about during marriage, right? right? We talked about everything before marriage, but now during marriage, what does a healthy relationship look like? What may abuse look like? What are the things you can do to get help during the marriage? Either to decide to stay and work on it, or what are signs that you may need to get more help and leave that marriage. So just the during the marriage part of it is the next workshop. And then the last quarter of the year, inshallah, probably in September, we're planning on having the actual divorce one, which will be much more in depth with a divorce with another attorney, and maybe inshallah, Aisha, who knows if Aisha's up for it with the little baby. Otherwise, we can have local attorneys as well. And also just, we have people that run a divorce support group here too for divorced women. So just after divorce, what are you dealing with, you know? So I think there's 2 other sessions coming, so save your questions for that, inshallah. We will wrap up right now. Amani was going to just do a little dua, and then afterwards, if anybody needs to stay on for a few minutes, feel free to stay on with Aisha. She can answer a few more questions. I'll leave that up to you, Aisha, how long you can be on. But thank you so much for your time. We really, really appreciate it. I will be emailing everybody a survey. I'm putting the survey link in here just to let us know what you thought. Give us your feedback. And I will send the link in email as well. Okay, so Amani, if you want to end us with the dua officially, and then we'll go on for a few minutes until Aisha is just tired of us.
Absolutely.
Sure. Allah, we thank you for this beautiful gathering. We thank you for the knowledge. We thank you for the guidance you sent through your messenger and the holy book that can help us to be compassionate towards one another and fair towards one another, and to be loving towards one another. I ask you to guide our community to the straight path, to increase us in knowledge, and to help us apply the true meaning and purpose and spirit of your holy book, so we can achieve justice and protection, and we can share love and understanding and have better communication that can benefit the wellness of the whole community and the wellness of our children. Ameen, ameen.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Okay.
So I have a question if no one else has.
Sure,
Sorry,
go
I
ahead.
don't think. So would we have access to the video? I want my daughter to listen to it too, if possible. Okay, so we will get access to this recording?
So I am recording this, and I'm just going to give people a little bit of time to let me know if they want me to take anything out of it. And I will upload it online. It'll be a private video, so if you know anybody that does want to hear it, we can share the link with them. Yes.
Okay, excellent. Because I'm the one who has registered, my daughter hasn't, and I do want her to listen to this one. Second question
Yeah.
was, maybe you addressed it in the beginning and I missed it. Prenuptial agreements, are they like a contract of nikah?
No.
What are they
So
like?
sure. So that's a good question. So the marriage contract, the kitab or the nikah nama, whatever you call it in your language, or the marriage contract in English, is not, I would never argue that it is akin to a prenuptial agreement for several reasons. First and foremost, it is happening contemporaneous or simultaneous to the marriage, meaning it's not something that is negotiated before and signed before. It's happening at the time of the marriage, in like consecration of or solemnity of the actual ceremony of nikah. Prenuptial agreements are, there's not an Islamic precedent for a prenuptial agreement. That is something that is, separate and apart. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think prenuptial agreements and even postnuptial agreements can be very positive in Muslim communities. But prenuptial agreements are negotiated. In theory, they're negotiated prior to the marriage happening, prior to the ceremony happening. They can still be renegotiated, which is not the same thing as the marriage contract. And in it, you can talk about a lot of different things that would be at the time, that would be an issue at the time of divorce. So I do prenuptial agreements all the time. I did talk a little bit briefly about this at the beginning, but I think prenuptial agreements, you can talk about how you want your children to be raised. You can talk about life insurance. You can talk about health insurance. You can talk about inheritance. You can talk about what's separate property and then what is considered marital property. So a lot of people, you know, like me, who got married a little bit later in life, I had things that were mine before the marriage that I didn't want to be at issue if a divorce ever happened. Most scholars will tell you that the marriage contract is not something that anticipates a divorce. Islam, you're getting married, and the purpose of it is to be married. Yes, you have the ability to be divorced if something were to happen, but it's not a contract that's negotiated with divorce in mind. Prenuptial agreements are negotiated with divorce in mind. So same with postnuptial agreements. And so in theory and in enforcement, they are inherently different instruments. And so absent a prenuptial or postnuptial agreement, you're entitled to equitable distribution or whatever the laws of that state that you're in are of what you get. And you're entitled to your mehr through the marriage contract. But that's why, you know, I'd say there's a difference, because if you have a prenuptial agreement, that's all you're going to get. You're not going to get equitable distribution. You're not going to get anything else. You're just going to get whatever you negotiated before you guys got married. Again, is that wrong? No, there's a lot of people who choose that for themselves, and that's fine, but should not be confused with the marriage contract, which is not an instrument of divorce.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Of course.
You know, there is cases, actually, there is one case I'm testifying in, it's like that the man claims that that the contract is a pre-nuptial contract, but it is not, because it only has the mehr, which
Right.
exactly as you said, it's more of a marriage gift only.
She should, if she has the ability, she should get an expert witness to testify at court about what the marriage contract is, because a good expert will explain that it's, you know, just an instrument of marriage, has nothing to do with the divorce. Because what will happen if the judge doesn't know what the marriage contract is and they confuse it for a prenuptial agreement, they'll say, oh, she gets her mehr and that's all she gets. So if she has the resources, she should look into an expert witness.
Yes.
May I say something? Okay, so what happens with some women? They do what is called mu'akhar, when they keep like a huge
The delayed.
yeah, should that be put in a prenup or still be on the marriage contract, since it might not be recognized as a in court later? She might not get that money.
I think the court will still give it. So the court will look at it as whether it's delayed or prompt. If it's in the contract and you're arguing that it's a contract, it should be, the court should recognize it regardless. The problem that you have with the mu'akhad is because it is delayed and it is an issue of divorce. So not every mu'akhad is an issue of divorce. So some people will, it's like some men will argue, I'm in school right now, and so I'll give you, you know, $2,000 now as a prompt mehr, you know, and then when I'm done with school and I'm making more money and things are more stable, then I'll give you your mehr. And then there's some people who say, in the instance of divorce, I'll give you the mehr of whatever. If the contract says in the instance of divorce, as far as legal enforceability, they'll make it enforceable. But I think that the lawyer would have a stronger argument that if it says in the instance of divorce, you're going to get this money, they have a stronger argument to say that's all she's entitled to at the time of divorce, as opposed to she's entitled to that plus the equitable distribution or the alimony or the whatever else. So if, you know, I don't want to discourage people from having the ma'akhad, especially if that is in your culture, but in terms of actual practical application, it's better to just get it prompt. You know, the prompt mahad is, you know, whatever the number is, so that, you know, there aren't these confusions later. But yeah, putting it into the prenuptial is also another way to deal with it. And you make sure that the prenuptial agreement says then that the wife is consenting to the fact that this is all she's going to get. She's not going to get anything additional to that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I see there's a lot of people still on, but no one else is unmuted. So I don't know if they're just hanging on or if they will actually want to say something.
So just a suggestion,
Sure.
and again, it's my fault. I was in another seminar listening to another thing we do once a month, and that finished, and then I joined yours. I really wanted my daughter to join this. I'm a lady who is 46 years old, and I have a kid who is 21.
Great.
And she's born and raised here. So I would say kind of an American kid, Muslim American kid. So she had questions about an ayah in the Quran, and I know this is not the forum, but it's about marriage, because it's most imams, when we talk to, say that a Muslim woman can only marry a Muslim man. Whereas the question arises in discussion when we translate it, believing men for believing women. So when you consider believing men, it could be from the other religions if they are practicing. That's where we both get into dialogue. Is that something you already discussed, or is it possible for you to kind of start with that and then get into living as the marriage in the next one? Or maybe you can do one on that, or maybe we can email you on that, whatever you prefer.
We'll take that suggestion, and I'll tell Sadaf. I mean, I think that there's, I mean, that's a very complicated question, as you can imagine. So certainly I think that we can call in some scholars to give us some advice on this. But I think that's it's a good suggestion. It definitely comes up in conversation a lot. So,
and I see many of my nieces, nephews have those questions. I am a teacher. Lots of students have those questions, and I'm not a person who can answer, but any imam that I asked in Orlando, most of them said, no, a Muslim woman can only marry a Muslim man. But there's one who said that believing women, believing men. So I just wanted that you're doing on marriage, if you have some insight, or you can look into that from, you know, all the imams, I think, are men reading, people who translated are men who did it. So from a scholarly perspective versus behind, if you have, not that I'm saying to kind of deviate, but whatever you have, whatever, just in, if you could start with that, or have just put that into within, because that's the challenge we face over here.
Yeah. I think, you know, I can speak about that. I know there are a lot of, because I also have daughters that are and, you know, Aisha, I mean, Sister Fatima has daughters that are older. Like I have a 23-year-old and a 1-year-old and a 20-year-old, like, and they do have these kinds of questions. And honestly, I've heard several different opinions about the matter, especially because the fiqh for minorities, the Muslim minorities, in a country is different from the fiqh for Muslim majorities. So I think that there are different opinions about it. And I think what we can do is maybe in the future, Amani and I will talk about it, and we can reach out to you, is if we have a Q&A for these girls, we can do that as well. And they can always bring any questions to Amani. She's our Hakima, and she is available for that. I know Amani and I have talked about it, and there are different perspectives about it, even Islamically. So I think that is something that, like you said, with the younger generation, they have questions and they're growing up here. So it is a little bit harder because they are interacting with people that are not Muslim. And what would that relationship look like? Is it allowed? How would it work? I'm sure that they're thinking about that, but I can talk with Amani about something for those girls, inshallah. So just reach out to us and we'll let you know. We'll if we can do something soon, inshallah.
Much
I have
appreciated.
a question. Yeah, you're welcome. Aisha, I have a question, just one quick question. I think it's already 6:30, but out of the nikah things that you mentioned, you know, the officiant and witnesses and all of that, which ones are required and which ones are optional?
My understanding is that the only required ones are the witnesses and the mahar, and then the bride and groom. I don't think that, I've noticed that the officiant now signs it. I don't think that that's required. I mean, I think that there's an understanding that there is going to be an officiant to do the nikah, to perform the nikah. But in terms of required elements, and, you know, frankly, there was a time when these weren't written down, right? So the required elements are, of course, what would be required for the nikah itself. And the requirements are that there is a mahar, that there are two witnesses, and of course the bride and the groom and the consent. There are some scholars who will say that the wali is also required, but other madhabs say no, that the woman can be her own wali. So that depends on your school of thought, but that's it in terms of requirements. And then the other element that is required of a nikah is the ishhar, that it is publicized, you know, that people need to know that you are married. That's an essential element that unfortunately doesn't get talked about enough, which is why we're seeing all these secret marriages, which is separate from polygamy, right? So I don't want the secret marriage to be conflated with polygamy. Those are two separate issues.
I had a question.
Okay, sure.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Oh, okay. So I wanted to add to what another sister had just recently added from what I've heard and stuff. Like growing up, I was, you know, born and raised here, and growing up, what I heard in terms of, you know, marrying outside of our religion and things like that is just that there is no real al-kitab, or so at the moment, just because the books from the Quran and the books of the Torah and Bible, they have been changed by mankind, right? The Christians, they have different variations of the Bible. The Torah, they had different variations. And I heard that they were lifted up, Allah lifted them up once he brought down the Quran. Those books were destroyed. So what we were told that there's no real, al-kitabs. So in terms of Muslim marry a Muslim. So that's what we heard growing up. So we kind of never really questioned. But although I do know a lot of young people now, I know they have questions like that. And it was just interesting to me because I just feel like, I don't know, that's what we were told. And then that was it. That was like case closed. So don't even kind of ask about it. You know, that's how we were kind of brought up, like, okay, you're Muslim, you're marrying Muslim kind of situation. So that was one thing. And then I don't know more knowledge about that to say anything else, but I just wanted to give my perspective how we heard it back in the day when we were growing up. And then the other thing is that I wanted to ask if there was any ways to enforce raising a Muslim child. Father claims to be Muslim, but now is drinking alcohol and like doing, you know, eating things that are unpermissible, and, you know, putting it upon the child and stuff like that, you know.
Mhm.
I think those things, I'm gonna step in, Aisha, before
Yeah,
you
sure.
say anything. I think in our next session, which will be about things that are happening in the marriage, we can talk about that. And Aisha, you need to rest. I think let's just
Okay,
wrap
great.
it up. Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
don't want you to stay on any longer. You had a long day, and I know you have a long week ahead.
So thank you. No, I appreciate that. No, that's definitely a great question. I was going to say that's a great question for what happens during the marriage, because no matter how much you talk and communicate before, things always change and people's thoughts on things change, and people negotiate certain things and they thought that they hadn't. And so definitely deserves an entire session to talk about. So I thank you all. Please keep me in your duas. It is going to be a big week, inshallah. And I will see you on the flip side, inshallah.
Inshallah, we'll be praying for you. Thank you, everyone. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.